What's up? Welcome to the Final Fantasy Entertainment and Podcast Network. I am your host, the Warrior of Hype, and joined with me today, as always, is the Faraga fighter, Vinny. What's up, Vinny?
Nothing much. Just super excited to talk about my favorite Final Fantasy today.
That's right, and we also have a very special guest, and you might have seen that video from a year or so ago from Soldier First Class saying Final Fantasy X is one of his favorite games of all time. And I was just like, man, we gotta have Soldier on here to celebrate Final Fantasy X, 20 years of Final Fantasy X. What's up, Soldier?
Not a whole lot. Just really excited to talk about 20 years of Final Fantasy X and thousands of hours of playtime.
At least.
Yes. Oh my God. All right. So
Minimum.
here's what's really exciting about this. I've gotten Soldier, who's Final Fantasy X is one of his favorite Final Fantasy of all time. It was before Final Fantasy 14, of course. So as far as like, your traditional Final Fantasy title, even though I don't know how we want to classify 14, it might be. Anyways, Final Fantasy X is up there for both of you fellas. It is your favorite game of all time, or it's one of your favorite games of all time. And Vinny, I know this game means a lot to you.
Hmm.
So when we did the Final Fantasy VII special, I kind of took the lead. That game means so much to me. For this one, Vinny, I'm handing it off to you, bro.
All right. Um, yeah, Final Fantasy X means a lot to me because it wasn't the first Final Fantasy I played, um, but that was back before I knew I was playing Final Fantasy. I was so young that I was just picking up games at my godfather's house and just playing them, and they were fun. Final Fantasy X was like the first one that I actually knew I was playing a Final Fantasy. Um, and so I guess we'll start with our first encounter with the game. Um, I guess I'll go first. So I was I think 9 when this game came out, and uh, my mother's friend used to babysit me at her house, and I was in my mother's friend's son's room, and in the PS2 was Final Fantasy X. Before I knew it was Final Fantasy X, my first experience with Final Fantasy X was actually Tidus waking up in Bicanel Island, and so the first three characters I ever met from Final Fantasy X was Tidus, Auron, and Lulu, and I thought those were like the three main characters because I was playing on his file, and I didn't want to like ruin anything, so I just kept playing that one part over and over and over again. Like I would get to where Kamari was like aimlessly walking up the sand dune and then sliding back down, and so I thought he was like I thought he was like super low IQ because he was just doing that. I was like, okay, this is like a super low IQ character. So like I didn't. That's my first impression of Kamari, and that's probably why I never use Kamari at all in my playthroughs because it's just like that was my first impression with him, and I was like, this guy's not gonna do anything. So my first experience with Final Fantasy X was this like super bright colored, like super blue sky on like a super orange sand, and everybody's using swords and magic, and that's where my imagination started to shape and take form. These characters. You had Auron with this massive sword, doing a lot of damage. Tidus was with a smaller sword, like being kind of like the
Agile.
yeah, he was agile, but he was more like the to me he struck me as like the kid. Like Lulu and
Mm-hmm.
Auron were kind of like the parents, and he was the kid because they were like so much more mature than he was.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was Lulu casting magic, and that's like from that moment on I was just like I love swords, magic, and monsters. Like that, like Final Fantasy X has shaped my my whole life because of that moment where I was just like, swords and magic and monsters are like really cool. And so all of the stories, like all the stories I would write, or or when I was like playing as a kid with imagination and stuff, everything revolved around like fire, water, thunder, and ice, and then like stronger versions of those spells. Like that's all of my imagination went that way with with the swords and the magic, and it's all thanks to Final Fantasy X. And playing it in that kid's room and playing Bicanel over and over again because I didn't want to ruin anything. So that's my first experience with Final Fantasy X.
Nice. What's up, Soldier? You want to go?
So I would say that my first experience with 10 wasn't my most impactful. Um, I too had a friend that had played it, owned the game, and if I remember right, the first thing I saw was actually Mount Gagazet, and he was running around the mountain, and I saw like these summon creatures, and I was like, man, this game is awesome. Like, this is something I don't think I've ever really seen before in a video game. And at the time, my experience with Final Fantasy had been 7 and 8 when I was really, really young. And so I had not seen like the graphical style of 10 yet. And then I saw 10 and I'm like, wow, this is cutting edge. This is what games I never even dreamed games could look like this. And then you see all the bright colors and the island type setting of 10 and you're like, wow, this is peak Final Fantasy style right here. And but I think impact wise, my first major experience with 10 was probably a year after it came out. My grandma had died in 2002, and shortly after that I started playing 10. I had picked it up. It started kind of being my comfort game, and it got me through that period of my life where, you know, I had just lost somebody special to me, and I'm watching these characters go on this journey and of self-discovery and figuring out that they don't necessarily have to go with what everyone is telling them to do. It's what they feel in their heart. And a lot of those messages and themes that came from 10 shaped a lot of like my early teens to even now. You know, and a lot of that, it helped me through a really tough time, but it also was like my first experience where I understood a story on a deeper level, and it was also extremely fun. So, but yeah, Yuna's journey and finding that, like, who they were as people and coming to terms with things like you know, Titus Inject, that was something for me because like my father had been a truck driver my whole life from a very young age, and so I didn't have, I won't say that I had a bad relationship with my dad, but I had like a very weird one where when he would come home, it would be like, you know, this guy's trying to be my dad, but I don't know him that well. And I kind of related that with Titus and his father because at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of what came down to their relationship was a lack of understanding. And so for me, that's where Final Fantasy X was really impactful the first time that I got a chance to fully sit down with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, man. For sure. That, like, so I'll talk. I guess I could tell you about my first experience with Final Fantasy X, and then my most recent experience, and it kind of ties back into what Soldier was saying. Like, ultimately, this is a father and son game. You know, there's a relationship between father and child. But for me, my first like experience with it was, you know, it came out December 2001 in the US. I wasn't able to get it for Christmas, but thankfully my birthday is a follow up in January to catch all the gifts that I didn't get. You know, just put that in January. Yeah, so I picked that up. My friends were playing it, and that kind of upset me because they were getting a lot further than me. I told them not to tell me. You know, middle school was rough. But anyways, they all got stuck at Everett too. So that was kind of like, it was just basically that opening scene with the Blitzball Stadium. My 12-year-old self is just finding that just incredibly awesome. I loved everything about Final Fantasy X back then, but I honestly just don't think I really kind of grasped what was like. You have to, like, when you're young like that, you're just kind of like subconsciously grabbing things. But now that I'm a father, like that I'm a father of two kids, um, now the game has taken like a completely different perspective. Um, and like you said, like I said, this game is it's all about father and child and the long-term effects that a father can have on a child, whether it be good, like the way Braska loved and cared for Yuna, or scarring the way that Jecht mistreated and belittled Titus, or very negatively the way that Jiskel selfishly abandoned Seymour. And now yeah, I mean, like, look, we don't live in a world that is plagued by a monstrous incarnation of our sins, but these situations that the fathers face, they're relatable to any father. So you have the choice to be selfless and do what's best for your kid, putting your life aside and sacrificing, sometimes even sacrificing your future to ensure that the kid's future is better. And Braska does that for Yuna. And this leaves Yuna to grow up without a father. But Braska, of course, is like, he's always thinking. He sets her up in a nice village that she'll be cared for. Even has Oren like promised to look over her. So Braska did things right. But then when you get on the other side of things with like Jecht and Jiskel, and like the the funny thing is that it seems like, oh yeah, that's the easy thing. Obviously that's what you do, that's what a father should do. They should be selfless and all this, but the reality of it all is that being a father is easy, but being a good dad is difficult. Whereas like stress and expectations and other obstacles that are like plaguing the world around you, around a father, can certainly like complicate things. And so like Jecht loved Titus, like he did care for Titus, but he had other loves in his life, like winning blitzball, you know what I mean, like and his wife. um and like I don't necessarily think that every parent should just give up everything that they love, like, or everything they're passionate about, and just give it all up your dad now. I don't believe in that. But what Jack did was wrong because he didn't show them that it's cool to be passionate. He didn't show Titus like, hey, be passionate about this, get better at it, let's work together at it. And then being passionate about something is good. Jet was arrogant and selfish
It,
and didn't tolerate losers. So Jiskel wanted to preserve his image in the eyes of the public, and he cared so much about what others thought of him and his own child that he even goes as far as like just sending Seymour away. Obviously, Jiskel is on the extreme side of things. Obviously, this is a terrible father, but it's important for a father to remember that it doesn't matter what others think, and that sometimes you that gets inside your head. So don't worry about what other people are thinking. So showing your kid that it's good to be different and unique. So these three examples have me reflecting every night, like during this recent playthrough. Like every night I'm like reflecting on it, like during the day. Did I allow my kids to express themselves without any like judgment? Was I too hard on them? Was I being selfish? Did I like did I allow the stress of the world, like with COVID and problematic situations, did I allow it to get to me? Did I take enough time out of my own very busy schedule to show kids that I cared? And, it's just like, it's these things that Final Fantasy X, and as all Final Fantasy games are, is of course a fantastical story with larger than life monsters defying destiny, world ending stakes. But the characters are always rooted in reality and will always resonate with someone on a personal level. And that's why I find it interesting when anybody's ever like ranking the series, because it's going to connect with somebody in a different way. Like every game, every Final Fantasy is going to connect with somebody in a different way. But with this one, this Final Fantasy X would have never connected with me on this level until I've become a father. And now I'm like, oh, I'm seeing things from Jek's point of view, from Braska, like how difficult that must have been for Braska, and like things like that, and like how obviously not to do things like Jiskel did. Um,
And see, it's
so
funny that you say that because like on the other end of it, I'm the Titus in the situation, whereas you're the
yeah,
Jacked. Like I
right.
saw it more from his perspective as like, am I going to disappoint my father? Am I going
Mhm.
to, all of these things that I'm like playing through in my head are the Titus is part of it, and you're coming from more the side of, am I going to disappoint my kids? Like
Right.
that's or am I going to raise them properly? So
Mhm.
it's funny that you mentioned how it resonates with different people in different ways because I took the same exact story that you played and are playing right now, and I
Mhm.
got a completely different perspective of it. But we both can see the other side's perspective when we switch it around. So
Yeah,
that's another really cool reason about like why these games are so impactful.
Yeah.
absolutely, man. And it's like in like seeing like Titus, like saying you're the Titus of this side of things. It's like I want to make sure that my kids don't feel like like they're they have to impress, or they have to either or they're going to be disappointed. I'm going to be disappointed in them or something like that.
Hmm.
And it's just it's wild as a father now, because like it's some things that should be easy, things that should be super simple are not. Like it's everything you do during the day is affecting the kid. So it's like, and Final Fantasy X just is hitting me in a whole different level right now as a father. So like that's I just wanted to share that. But thank you. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for listening.
And that's the good thing too about going back and playing these old games is because like now that we're older, and that's why I totally am okay with the whole remaster remake scenarios of like modern gaming because I feel like back in the day there were a lot of games that had a message to tell that we grew up with, but we weren't
Yeah.
quite old enough to quite grasp those concepts yet. And now that we're getting older and these games are being remastered, it's not just about the gameplay anymore. It's about these messages that we didn't get when we were kids. And now we're
Mhm.
adults and we're like, wow, I never saw this game in this light before, but now I'm seeing it from the perspective of somebody who can understand these concepts. And it's really cool to see that evolution when it comes to these games that we're seeing nowadays.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
so I think that segues perfectly into the next topic, which is um, as the years go on and with subsequent playthroughs, your first experience with the game and the characters you related to when you were younger in your first playthroughs, and then you're playing through now and you're having different experiences um, with relating to certain characters. Like when I first played through, I definitely related to Tidus
Hmm.
and Riku, just kind of like that young, carefree, like I'm gonna do what I want, like screw the rules. And
Yeah.
then I got a little older, and I found myself relating more to Waka, who was like you know, like I'm getting older, and breaking the rules has serious consequences the older you get. And then Waka's kind of just like always in the background, like no, let's not fight a maester because like
Right.
that's like like trying to square up with the president or something, like like you don't do that. And Waka's always just like, oh, we broke some rules, we gotta atone for what we did. And then and then you get a little older, and then oh, what I just lost my screen. Okay, it's back.
No.
um you get a little older, and then you start realizing like you're kind of like Orin, where
Yeah.
you've experienced a whole bunch, and you just
You're,
don't have a lot to say. You're like, because
you're,
you start when you try and give advice to younger people, and they're just like, I know, but I'm different. Don't worry. You're just like, okay, yeah, you're different.
Yeah, when to back off, like
Yep.
when to like you're just like,
You're like,
okay, whatever, this
you're
is useless.
you're just like this. You're just the old guy. You're just like I'm sick of your shit. Like
yeah, right. Like, because Tidus and Yuna are 17, Riku's 15. Then you get Waka and Lulu, who are 20. Waka's 23, Lulu's 22, and then you get Orin, who's 35. And Orin's just kind of like guiding them, saying like we're gonna go this way, and Titus is like, I don't want to go this way, I want to go this way, and Orin's like, all right, but you do realize that this way also leads to okay, what? Yep, we'll go this way.
Yep, all right,
What
whatever.
I
Sure.
love though about Yuna's evolution though is like she's kind of stuck in between.
Mhm.
Like she's wise beyond her years, but at the same time, you can still see those like little flakes of she's still very childlike, like
Mhm.
Titus and Riku, because it seems like when you first start the game, you see this. I don't want to say uptight because she's not really uptight. She's just very duty driven, right?
Mhm. A rule
Yeah.
And
follower.
yeah, and she's very like honorable, and she wants to follow the Yevon religion. She wants to do what's expected of her. She has kind of a societal fate, right? Like
Yeah.
she
Mhm.
is driven by society's want for her to save the world, and she wants to save the world, and she wants to do that admirably.
But she doesn't know why she wants to save the world.
Exactly. And then you go and she meets Titus, and Waka and Lulu are kind of like those parents where it's like Lulu's like, okay, you can hang out with us, but you can't be a bad influence on her. And then
Mhm.
you start to see over the course of the game is that she is that Titus is this influence, this childhood that she never had, that she never got to have. And
Yeah.
his innocence and his mannerisms and the way he is like, I don't care who is in charge. I'm going to lead the life I want to lead. And I think you start to see that evolution in her where not only is she this rule follower, but she starts to make her own rules. Like she
Yeah.
starts to follow her moral compass instead of something that's established in her from her childhood.
Mhm.
And
They
so
they like rub off on each other too.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
also
Quite
see
literally.
Titus become yeah. you, you also see Titus become a lot more mature, and at the end, it's almost like they almost swap personalities a little bit towards the
Yeah.
end.
Kind of like blended personalities.
Yeah, because Yuna is more carefree, she's more young love, she's really excitable, and then you have Titus who at the very end is like, I finally know who I am. I finally can
Yeah.
forgive my father for all these things. Even though, his last line to his father is, I hate you. That I hate you is more powerful than any other I hate you in the game because that's Titus finally saying, I love you.
Mhm.
I forgive you. Let's move on with
I,
our lives. You're my father. I'm your son. And it's like the pairing is just so great there that it
Yeah.
works. I mean, it just works perfectly.
to me, that last I hate you, because like he hates his father the whole game because he left and didn't
Mm.
treat him right, and then that last I hate you was like, to me it felt more like it was like Jack redeemed himself in his eyes, and he says I hate you because I don't hate you, basically, like
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
exactly.
hate that I love you now, type of deal. And
Mm.
he's like there was just so much in those last three words, because it's like I hate you because this would have been a lot easier to kill you now if I still hated you like I used to hate you.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate you
Yeah.
because you are a good person and I lost all this time with you that I could have had that I'm not going to get. And that, just like he hated him because of all the love that he felt for him at the end of the game.
Well, and then
Um,
the high five at the very end
Yeah.
is the perfect seal
mhm,
on that because it's like now we're father and son. Like
mhm.
now that is what's going on.
And
Yeah.
then the last character that I haven't related to yet, I feel like, um, Kamari is more of like the mystic grandpa, where he doesn't say, hey, he rarely says anything, and he just seems so low IQ, but he's actually a wellspring of wisdom, where he
Yeah.
he he just understands the world so much better than the rest of the party does, even Orin, because Orin, um, is there are moments where Orin breaks his composure, especially when he sees himself with Unaleska again. Like the young Orin learned from that experience. Like, there is no changing. Uh, like he was kind of like, Titus, where he's like, why did you let them go and do this? And then when he sees that again playing over from the Fireflies, he kind of breaks and loses his composure. but Kamari throughout the whole game, I think he stays pretty solid, even against like uh uh Biren and Yankee when they're just kind of like in his face.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're physically abusing him in Luca, and like Kamari doesn't retaliate, and then somebody says like Kamari, let's go because Yuna's in trouble. He gets punched one last time, clenches his fist, and then goes to like perform his duty because he's wise enough to know like doing something to you guys right now isn't going to fix the situation that I need to go save. So I feel like
Doesn't
Kamari. Hmm?
doesn't he knock him out right before he leaves the bar?
Yeah, I
Um.
think he gets punched and then he just and then I think
Oh,
I
he
think
does leave,
yeah,
he
I
leaves
think
a
somebody
final blow.
runs in, says Yuna's in trouble, and he just punches one of them and then just
yeah,
runs.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He
just,
he knocks one of them out and then runs away. Um.
yeah.
But I mean, he takes so much abuse from them, and like
Hmm.
I mean, the game is filled with a whole lot of like societal abuse. People being very intolerant, and then
Hmm.
uh,
Or people
something.
being very caring, like the
Mhm.
community is such another theme. Of
Mhm.
course you got the father and child, but community, like
Mhm.
Besaid, great to Yuna, loved her.
Mhm.
Baj, the place where Seymour was, not
Mhm.
so much. They hated him, and he had
Mhm.
to grow up in that environment. So
Right.
you see that juxtaposition between Yuna growing up in a it takes a village, whereas Seymour, it takes a village to just ruin you. So it's
Right.
kind of cool.
And you know, uh, the Ronso's horn being such like a sacred thing to them, and then when Kamari was younger, because like I'm sure we've all experienced, either hanging out with uh, siblings or we've had friends that were older than us and they took advantage of the fact that we were younger than them and would kind of, you know, abuse us in some sort of way that we didn't realize how like the type of abuse we were receiving because we were young and didn't realize that it was abuse. But them grinding his horn down when he was young, and then for
Mm.
the rest of his life calling him hornless is like, to us, we're not giant blue cats with horns that can relate to that, but we could relate on some level of like, you know, something embarrassing happening in elementary school or middle school, and then it follows you for the rest of your, you know, academic career until you leave high school. Like, it's and then us being wiser because of it, knowing like, I was bullied and I know how that felt, so I'm not gonna if I see somebody do something embarrassing, I'm not gonna put them down for it. I'm gonna be like, hey man, it happens to everybody. Don't worry. Like you wanna after going through some type of abuse like that, you kind of want to lift other people up because you don't want people to feel as low as you were. And there's just like a lot of that in the game, a lot of like, you know, with the like religious intolerance like between Yevon and the Albed, and then Waka being so against the Albed, and then
Hmm.
having his eyes opened was I'm really glad they opened his eyes and that he didn't just stay intolerant the rest of the game because
Yeah.
that's something that everybody in this on this planet can learn from is
Well,
just mhm
yeah, and I agree because like here's the thing too. Like you look at it, I think one of the biggest concepts of this game is that it's about perspective.
mhm
You know, Yuna and all them, they see the Yevon religion as this good society, this good establishment. And then you look at it from like Riku's perspective and Sid and Brother, and they have a different story to tell.
Hmm.
And then you start to actually see the corruption. You start to see what these people are capable of, and
mhm
it's basically just a matter of perspective because it's like the common man's not going to know that Yevon is bad. They're not going to
mhm
know. They're just going to see like, oh, we have these ceremonies at the Blitzball Stadium. We have these religious leaders, and well, the summoners are defeating sin. So how can they be part of an evil establishment when the summoners themselves are being used?
mhm
Like Yuna was pretty much what's the word I'm looking for? Groomed since birth
mhm
that she was going to be the next summoner. She was going to be the
Y-
next
but
person in line. And it's like, it's all about perspective because she even learns going through Via Purifico and learning about, the deep seated issues in Yevon that not everything is as it seems. And that's like, I feel like that's a really big concept in the game is perspective.
and they brainwash them so much to the point where that like as you met other summoners, they were like, all right, let's see who defeats Sin first. Like they were rushing to their death because the summoners knew that they would die. We as the player were the only ones kind of kept out of the loop because Titus was kept out of the loop,
Yeah.
but they knew that like that was the end of their journey, and they were so brainwashed by like being told that this is what you do that they were
Hmm.
like, yeah, let's race. Let's see who's the better summoner and who can beat Sin first. Knowing like beating Sin means that you die. So like I'd be like, yeah, you can have a head start. Go ahead.
I can't remember what the exact line or what they were talking about, but when I was doing this playthrough, I actually there's a moment where it's the sunset on the Mayan high road,
Hmm.
and Titus and Yuna are watching the sunset, and Titus says something like he questions it. And he goes, "But why does all this have to happen?" or something like that. And Yuna just she literally says, I haven't really thought about that answer. I don't know. Like I don't know
Hmm.
the answer to that. I just know I have to do it type thing. Like she literally says that out loud. It's like there's the moment where like what you guys were saying where like they're rubbing off on each other, like where Titus is whatever a crybaby, literally described as a crybaby. Like he is a
Hmm.
crybaby. And then Yuna, which is dutiful and like focused, and then they start to kind of like and carefree, I should say carefree, but he's a crybaby, but he's carefree. And then like and Yuna's not so carefree, more focused, and then they start to kind of trade paint. And that's a really cool thing about Final Fantasy 10 too. So I just kind of not 10 2 but 10 as well.
There you go.
uh,
Yeah, you have to say either 10 also or 10 as well,
yeah.
so not to be confused with the 10 2. Um, but yeah. So this game jumped. So going from Final Fantasy 9 to 10 was a huge jump graphically. The music was, not the 32-bit or whatever that we were used
Mhm.
to from the previous ones. So we had the
It's the
graphics, the
first one
music.
that Umatsu did not compose entirely. It
Hmm.
was with Hamazu and man, I can't remember, but Hamazu was a big part of this one.
But like
It
even the
was
original
I'll think of it here in a second.
I know, right? Why I can't think of.
the original Final Fantasy X soundtrack was great. Then the HD remaster
Mhm.
soundtrack was also
Amazing.
amazing.
Can I just
Um,
say something real quick?
Absolutely.
Junior Nakano, by the way.
Thank you, thank you. When it comes to the remastered soundtrack, like the arranged version,
Hmm.
I really wish, and of course, I mean the pixel remasters sound insanely good. I really wish there was an option like there was in Final Fantasy X HD where you can switch between original soundtrack and arranged, and then you can hear it in real time, like the difference.
Hmm.
And I thought that would have been really cool in the pixel remaster. So missed opportunity, but that's nothing against the pixel remaster, which is freaking amazing soundtrack. But go ahead.
There are parts of the HD remaster where I will, like before a certain part or boss battle, I will change from the remastered soundtrack to the original because um, there's like, I mean, it would be very extensive if they allowed you to go in and like specifically choose like which soundtracks you wanted original or remaster. But like Seymour's um, Seymour's final battle, Omnis, I think
Mm.
sounds so much better in the original than the
Mm.
remaster. But I mean that's besides the point. I think both soundtracks are
Yeah,
just amazing.
top notch.
But this also introduced voice acting to also
Hmm.
go along with facial expressions, which I think is
Yeah.
also huge for the storytelling. So
Like
um,
on the back of the box, those were the things, man.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
it's like it's a
that's
real time facial expressions.
that's how you know gaming has evolved so much
Yeah,
because that was the major selling point on the back of the
fully
box.
voiced characters, real time facial expressions, stuff like that.
So like go
3D animations.
3D.
right. And didn't they also say like no pre-rendered backgrounds, but there were totally pre-rendered backgrounds
Yeah.
in this.
Yeah,
Like I'm pretty sure
sometimes.
they advertised that. They were like no pre-rendered backgrounds. Like no, I think they were. But
This looks like a concept art.
so like going from, an amazing game like Final Fantasy VII original where there was no voice acting, no facial
Mhm.
expressions, and everything. And then going to this, like, how did that impact the story for you? Like, were you more um, captivated by like the cutscenes? Were you more interested in what was actually going on with the story because of all this, uh, voice acting, or do you
Cutting
think,
edge technology.
yeah, the cutting edge technology, or did you enjoy how Final Fantasy VII's cutscenes were able to actually um, employ a lot more info, I think, in their cutscenes because it was text based, and then also you had your own imagination for the tone. Like when you can hear the tone of something beforehand, you kind of
Mhm.
know the feeling. But when you don't know the tone, you kind of get to your brain likes to piece things together itself if it's missing, patterns. So.
Like there's a to jump in real quick, there's a
Mhm,
moment in the Nibelheim flashback in Final Fantasy VII where Sephiroth kind of like when that soldier, just the regular foot soldier, just or officer I should say, the officer falls to his death on the bridge, and he just
mhm,
kind of says, "I know it sounds bad, but we need to move on."
mhm.
And it's like, depending on how you read that, it could sound like Sephiroth was being just a douchebag and just be like, we gotta go, whatever, this dude, or he was, or if you read it like, like, I know it sounds bad, like you're like, if it's like, so that voice acting and stuff. But I'm gonna hand it back off to you and let
It-
Soldier answer this one.
yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword because if you think about voice acting and the way that it was back then and the way that it is now, um, I think at the time, like obviously when you're young, you don't tend to pick apart things like that. So I think at the time it gripped me a lot more because I I could put voices to these characters. And
Mhm.
until I think it might have been Advent Children that
Mhm.
we got our first Final Fantasy VII voice acting. I was trying to remember the timeline between Advent Children
Kingdom
and
Hearts kind
Crisis
of brought
Core.
out
Yeah,
Sephiroth and
yeah,
Cloud, but
that's true. Kingdom Hearts.
yeah.
But I think for me, the voice acting really did kind of pull me into it because then I could put voices to those characters. Whereas
Mhm.
before, you always had to give the characters voices that you thought they would have. And so for me, I think the upgrade in technology really gripped me too because it's like watching a movie
Mhm,
Mhm.
and you know that like okay, let's take your favorite movie and replace that actor with someone else. Is that
Mhm.
movie going to have as much of an impact on you as say it does now? Like if you took Tom Cruise out of a movie and you put Seth Rogen, like it's not going to be the same.
I love
So
that one.
so for me
Good
like
analogy.
voice acting in games is very important for me gripping in the story because when I think of Titus and I think of Orin, I hear their voices. I
mhm,
don't
Yeah.
just I don't just associate the moment with that character. I can actually hear them. So for me, like one of the and this is a moment that I was going to talk about on the show anyway, so I'll talk about it now.
mhm,
Orin's speech when they're about to fight Unalesca,
Mm.
his his this is your story speech.
Yeah.
Die and be free of pain or fight, that speech. Would that speech be as impactful had it not been for his voice acting? No, absolutely not. So, and that's in my top 5 video game speeches of all time.
mhm,
It's probably number 2. Um
Mhm.
and so for that moment specifically, I think this is where the voice acting really drew me in because in 7 and 8 and 9, you have those impactful moments. But if you were able to associate, like, say, the Nibelheim reveal, where you finally see where Cloud is actually reliving Zack's part of the story,
Mhm.
right? How impactful would that moment actually be if you were hearing it in voices? If you
mhm.
could hear Cloud's voice saying those words. And so for me, the voice acting in 10 is what really drug me in because I can associate Whereas in other games with text-based stories, I couldn't necessarily feel that character as much. Now, obviously, with remake and stuff like that, we're hearing those characters fully. And when those moments come up in the future parts of the remake, you'll be able to associate those voices with that moment.
The
But
problem is
back,
that's not
back in
the
two,
that's
yeah,
not the
back in
same game.
yeah, back in 2001 though, this was revolutionary. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
it really helped me. Like I said, Arn's speech 100% needed voice acting because you could
I'm
not pull that. You could not pull that off in a text-based adventure.
I'm excited to relive that again. I like I said, I left off at Mount Gagazet, so now I'm excited for that moment again because I do remember that speech being really, really good.
Not just the speech, but the atmosphere. It felt
Yeah.
You felt like you were taken
Yes.
out of
Yeah.
reality when you fight Unalesca. You're on that endless staircase. If you keep going up and down the staircase, you won't get anywhere. It'll literally bring you back around to the same spot, and you're just like
Mhm.
floating in space. Um, but one thing about the voice acting that they did, they added a little subtle thing that I really appreciated as I got older, because it made me feel I learned a little bit more about each character. But in battle, if let's say Orin is about to attack the last monster and it's gonna be the last hit, they have little quips
Yep.
Yeah.
that they'll say like, I love that
See ya.
because yeah, like it goes to all of their personalities. Like yeah, Titus has like the see ya thing, like very cocky, confident, which would go with a star athlete.
Mhm.
And then you have somebody more worldly and experienced like Orin, where he goes to attack something and he says farewell, like
Yeah.
kind of
Farewell.
like he's give like he knows that these used to be people. These monsters used to be living people who are, you know, kept into the world because their spirits couldn't be at rest. And he says farewell. He gives them respect.
Of course,
And
spoiler, but like, yeah, he can relate to them.
yeah, right. Um, and yeah, and after you realize that, then like yeah, you start to see like, okay, Orin has respect for these things because he's
Right.
relating to them. Um,
That's
and
cool.
then
Dude, that's cool. I actually never like. I mean, I didn't really put it together on that level before.
mhm,
It's kind of cool.
Well, and the other thing too about the voice acting is like we all know the scene, and as soon as I say it, y'all will know what I'm talking about. But
Let's do it. Let's go.
the laugh scene.
okay, so I was
Ha
gonna talk
ha
about that
ha.
later.
Everybody knows this scene, and the thing is, a lot of people don't get the subtle nuance of it.
Hmm.
They hear the voice, they hear the laugh, they think it's cringe, they move on. But what they're not seeing is that subtle nuance that's right there in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first official time where Yuna and Titus are having that young love,
Connection.
that like we called it earlier, trading paint. Like we had that moment is there, and a lot of people think it's cringe, and it
Mhm.
is kind of cringe, but
Hmm.
it's on
Meant to be,
purpose.
right?
It's
Yep.
meant to be cringe
Yeah.
because these
To
two are
force that laughter.
teenagers in love,
Yeah.
and it's a budding relationship, and so that's
It was
another
also
thing that
right after like Jet or
yeah.
Titus is just like he was down in the dumps, right? First time down in the dumps, where Yuna sees him like that, and then Yuna's just trying to get him to cheer up,
Yeah.
and just like sometimes
And
I like to, like if I laugh and then it makes you feel better,
mhm.
and then like he was teaching her how to whistle. She was teaching her to like teaching him to just laugh, and that'll get your spirits. I liked it.
And they reference that scene at the very end where she goes to
Mm.
whistle on the dock. Like
Mhm.
so it's all purposeful. Like it's not, oh, it's just cringe. Let's just throw this in here because we have terrible voice acting. No, it was actually on purpose, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
it served a great purpose.
And the rest of the party also reinforces that, because if it wasn't purposefully cringe, the rest of the party would have just been like, oh, look at them being cute and stuff. Like, no, like Waka, Lulu, everybody's kind of just like, hey, we thought you guys were in trouble. Like like what are you doing? Like they like Waka had this like weird look on his face. He's like, I thought you hit your head, you
Yeah,
know, like.
right.
So like the rest of the party
She wanted
also,
her she wanted her pilgrimage to be full of laughter.
right.
That was her. So
So I guess we could segue into what the first time you heard the laugh. So the
he's like, I have this in my notes. Let's just go ahead
I
and talk
I,
about the laugh.
I do because it was it's a pretty important part of the game. You know, like whether it's comical or taken seriously or somebody thinks it's just cringe because it made me physically awkward. I was playing this part by myself, but like I'm watching it and I'm feeling like physical embarrassment, like kind of, this is when I
Mm,
was younger and cared about what other people thought. Now I don't. But,
right.
I was like, because I was putting myself in these characters' shoes. I was immersing myself and like that's happening and I'm just feeling kind of like this is weird. Like like this is making me uncomfortable. But, that I think that was the first time a video game's actually impacted me physically from,
Yeah.
playing it.
I
And
used to, used to play these games with my door open and living at the house, my parents are right there in the living room and when they're doing the grunts and stuff. Final Fantasy 13 has the worst grunts by the way,
mhm,
with Vanille.
Or 10-2 might be worse too.
Oh,
yeah.
A
I know
very specific.
there was one moment where like I had to record it, but Vanille will give like a like I remember having to turn down. I was like, oh,
Like, uh-oh.
a little bit. So sometimes it can be a little like make you take you out of the moment by like, oh, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't
Right,
shouldn't be
you
listening to this very loud.
you
It's
grab the
like being
remote
at
and
work. It's like being at work on your phone and somebody sends you this weird thing and you're like,
Yeah, you open it up.
you
Crap, turn it down.
and that's instantly when somebody's walking behind you every time.
Always.
um so what makes this game reach out to you guys personally that the other games didn't quite hit? Like obviously 7 excluded, but like what made this game really reach out to you that like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 didn't?
Mm.
Well, I can say, okay, so like I don't know if you have like a gameplay portion of this show, but like so
Mhm.
for me in particular, according to like the other Final Fantasies, the past Final Fantasies leading up to this, I played 7, 8, 9, and then well in between I did go back and play like the older ones, but it was very open. It was very explore, find things. You know what I mean? Like very, very open. Whereas Final Fantasy X was this very streamlined, like point A, point B, go. And I mean, even more so than Final Fantasy 13. Like on this playthrough, I'm realizing that Final Fantasy X is even more linear than Final Fantasy 13. So why is it I asked myself before we're doing this podcast, I said, why is it that 13 gets criticized so heavily for its linearity, but Final Fantasy X is praised, and like it's not even an issue for Final Fantasy X. So like the story, its pacing in Final Fantasy X, I
Mhm.
think, is what lends itself to the favor of not being criticized. In this instance, the linearity worked in its favor. So the story was simple enough at first to understand, like so like you get everything you need to know as you're going from point A to point B, from one town to the next town. You always feel like you're moving forward, um and it's never complicated. Like the story is never complicated. It's fed to you in like a nice full course meal, you know what I mean? Like you're given the dinner, and then eventually you're going to get the big meal, and it's going to be like, oh, this is a lot to take in, but you're ready for it at that point. Whereas Final Fantasy 13 introduced so much at once. So like perhaps feeling like tunnel vision as you're going down the linear paths, where it's just like, I need to get to the next point so I know what the heck is going on here. Whereas 10 is just like, I want to get to the next point. Not a need. I just want to, and I'm just kind of like, I'm just having fun with it. and the locations were peaceful. They were stunning, beautiful to look at. So I know I'm making a lot of comparisons to 13 right now, and that wasn't the question. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
But like, but like that was the thing. Like 13 gets criticized so heavily for its linearity. So I come up with an analogy. You know what I mean? I like my analogies here. So if Final Fantasy 13 was like driving down a dirt road in a lightning storm, right? Whereas, and it's just a point A to point B on this dirt road, and it's bumpy as hell. Final Fantasy X was like cruising down the boulevard with the top down. You know what I mean? You're just going point A to point B, but it's so much more enjoyable. And of course, that does open up when you get the airship, and you got a lot more options.
Well, and to be honest, too, like you said, with the linearity part of it, like the airship.
Yeah.
When you in old Final Fantasy games, like it was veiled linearity, right? Like you still had to pretty much go from point A to point B till a certain point, but it was presented differently. It looked like there was more to the world because there were these outside areas that were random encounters outside on the
left,
overworld.
right, up, down.
Yeah. But with 10, it's one of those deals where like you have like there are branching paths that have secrets. And with 10, I feel like there's a lot of if you don't complete this in a certain way, then you're in this area. Or like the Chocobo Eater, for example. Like you get knocked off the platform into that back area and you have to come back. Whereas like 13,
that area,
13 felt like you're just run and fight, run and fight, run and fight, next area, run and fight, and then next area. It's like that's where I think the linearity differences are kind of at. Plus, 10 feels like a whole world, whereas 13 feels like you're running on platforms and rails until you get to your destination. If that makes sense. Like there's different variants of areas that feel more like 10 actually takes place on a planet, whereas 13 feels like it takes place in a
cocoon.
Yeah.
I feel like for 13, I was always inside. I feel like I was always inside. Like every single area was a dungeon. Yeah.
Yeah, but see, and like 13 though, and like to kind of go back to my point though, and it makes you feel like you're claustrophobic, right? Although if you look at the maps of 13, they are way more like branching paths, way more like areas like to explore in this from point A to point B. There's so many different ways you can go to get to point B. Whereas 10, I mean, I swear to God, dude, like it's a line.
Oh yeah.
And there's maybe like a little branch here or there where if you decide to do that, you get rewarded for it.
But it's always a dead end.
Not out of your way, right? It's not like, oh, if I go down this thing, I don't know where I'm at. It's just, I'm going to go down there, get my treasure chest, maybe get in like 2 or 3 fights, and then I'll come back. And like 10 is literally, a straight line if you look at it. Whereas 13 opens it up a lot, but you still feel confined. And that was the weird thing when I was thinking about this. I was like, 13 is criticized so heavily for linearity, but 10 is more linear than 13. And
it's all about presentation.
It's all about presentation. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what got me to the point where I was like, 10 just feels beautiful and open and like serene, whereas 13 feels claustrophobic, like you said. So I think if I want to, for me, 10 stood out so much because of obviously the cutting edge technology at the time where like, you have these 3D characters who I can actually see their faces. I can hear their voices. That was for at the time, like that's what made that stand out. And nowadays going back and playing it, I see like how linear it is. And I'm like, wow, it makes me think back on it. Like, how did this game where 13 was essentially kind of a follow-up, like let's follow in the footsteps of 10 and like see if we can recreate that success. And it's like, no, you just didn't do it right. Like, I don't know, man. It just made me, it gave me this conversation in my head of like, why is 13 so criticized? And like you said, it's the presentation of 10. Like the Sade Village, that waterfall. Oh my God, it's beautiful, right? Like you want to be in this world. And like Soldier said, like you feel like you're going through a world because they literally show you the world map, like in like here you go, you're going to this Like this is your journey right now, and you can see your journey on this giant continent. That's kind of cool. That's kind of
Mhm.
cool. Yeah. So I guess that's why that's what makes 10 pop out.
Yeah. So for me, like I told you how my first experience with this game, I didn't even know it was Final Fantasy X. Um, and then a few years later, I never got it after I played it at my babysitter's house. And then a few years later, I am sleeping over my friend's house, and like maybe about 2 years later, I'm sleeping over my friend's house, and his dad is playing a video game in the living room, and I see him fighting this giant dragon, which turns out to be the Sanctuary Keeper, right after Mount Gagazet. Um, and I see him, and I was just like, "What game is this?" And his dad was like, "This is Final Fantasy X." And I was just like, "Oh, this game looks so cool." I hadn't made the connection that the game I played originally and then this one were the same. And so I'm watching him play, and he shows me the case, and I was just like, "Oh, this is the game I played like 2 years ago that I had no idea what it was." And one of the most vivid memories I have is, believe it or not, walking into Blockbuster and renting Final Fantasy X for the PlayStation 2, and I was like, I can't wait to play this. And like my parents were like, "You only have a week with it." I was like, "All right."
If anybody wants to know how old we are, Vinny just said
There it
Blockbuster.
is.
Yep.
This is the
Vin,
20th anniversary after all. Oh.
Vinny just said Blockbuster.
Yep. And I remember walking into Blockbuster, and Blockbuster did not have a lot of video games, and the video games that they did have were always like rented out, and it was the last copy of Final Fantasy X, and then I think I ended up keeping it so long that they just charged us full price for the game, and I kept it.
Nice.
And Yeah, so the game followed me. Like it's like the game followed me through when it released. And I kept seeing it, and I was like, all right, I have to play through this game. And of course, my first playthrough of it, I was horrible. My first roadblock was Sin Spawn Gi on the beach. That was my first roadblock because he was just way too strong for me. All of my character, I don't even think like Lulu didn't even have her second level spells yet when I was up to that boss, because I was just the pacing was really really good for the game. Um, I just kept running away from battles, and so I was playing through the story and I just got my ass handed to me on the beach, which made me want to go back and play again to get my characters where they need to be. And then it was still a pretty tough fight, but I ended up beating it. And then, of course, there was Evray. And then after Evray was Seymour on
Yeah.
Mount Gagazet. And yeah, so the pacing was really good. And if you play the game where you don't grind, but you also don't run away from battles, it keeps the difficulty pretty on par. Um, so that stood out to me because all the other Final Fantasies, I feel like the random encounter rate was just ever so slightly higher to where you were overpowered sooner than you should have been. As to
Well,
where,
except for that, is it Mushroom Rock Road that has like the worst
oh,
encounter rate
e-
ever?
every 2 steps you were in a battle.
Yeah, every 2 or 3 steps you were in a battle.
Oh
And
It was
god,
and
dude.
so bad. To this day, I still dread getting to that part because I'm like, ah.
Yeah.
um
And every monster on that road gives you like stone or some shit, so that you could.
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Gotta worry about that. Yeah.
Petrify was so bad because no number one, if you didn't cure it fast enough and they got hit again, then they would shatter.
Just
Yep.
And
wipe your whole party.
yep.
Mm-hmm.
So since we just spoke about grinding, let's talk about how perfect the sphere grid is.
Oh, I
Cool.
love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
So the sphere grid actually wasn't their first idea of the leveling system in this game. It was actually a um, a 100 by 100 grid of boxes, and your characters would obtain these tattoos that
Mm-hmm.
the tattoos would take up a certain amount of boxes, and that's how you would place them on the grid, and however you could fit, like it was kind of like Tetris. Do you have the image on your
Yeah,
book?
I do. Oh
You
well, I'm
found it?
I'm just gonna bring it up in the book, but yeah,
Okay.
that's what it looked like.
So
That
that's
was the original idea.
so these
Was
tattoos would be put in these
Oh wow.
boxes, and you would have it was kind of like Tetris. If you wanted all these abilities, you had to fit all these tattoos, and that didn't make it into the final cut of the game. Instead, they went with the sphere grid, and then we had the standard sphere grid and then the expert sphere grid. And I think that the sphere grid is probably my most favorite leveling system of all the Final Fantasies.
I would agree.
man, it was adapted by like the. I feel like it was adapted in some way by the rest of the franchise from that point on. Like we even
Well,
still see like remnants of the sphere grid today with Final Fantasy VII remake and the weapons leveling. It feels
The
like.
Crystarium,
well,
pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
I was gonna say the Crystarium is another reason why, like, you can compare 13 to 10, and 10 comes up supreme because 10 has the same kind of roadblocks that 13 does, but 10 allows you to do um, more customization with it. Like you can level up your character all the way to the end of their sphere grid, and then you're blocked with these level key spheres. And 13 kind of did the same thing, but instead of locking your character, at the end of their, skill tree, it was okay, this is as much as you can level up, and then you fight a boss, and then once you beat the boss, it opens up more, and it's like, you know, that was their way of like forced difficulty, I feel like you can only
Well,
level up so much.
and I agree with that too. And the thing is, the difference also is that yes, a lot of the party members in 13 can learn other jobs or whatever you want to call them, the paradigms.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But 10 allowed so much freedom and creativity with your characters. Like if you wanted Titus to be a hard hitting Auron type character, you could combine his speed with Auron's strength and
Mhm.
have a powerhouse. Or if you wanted Yuna, who is the statistically speaking is the best black mage in the game, you could do that. You could take her down Lulu's tree, and there was no paradigm shifting. There was no job switching. Every character could do every job that you wanted them to do. Like, and it all depended on you and what you decided to do on the sphere grid, especially the expert sphere grid. Now,
Hmm.
the standard wasn't as versatile. It basically had your predetermined paths until you got to a certain point, and then you could do that. But
Mhm.
with the expert sphere grid, and which is why I like it the most, is that everybody starts in a circle, basically, and you can branch out to that circle on their paths that they're generally like suggested to go, or you can go like around and be like, okay, well, I want Kimari to learn steel, or
Hmm.
I want Auron to learn Firaga. Like, this is what I want to happen, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Whereas 13 felt very locked to, I have to do these paradigms, I have to do this shift, I have to do that. I have to do, it's 10 sphere grid always felt really, really clean and really good to me. And then obviously there's the end game grind where you can put whatever spheres you want in it. Like, if
Mhm.
you can max it, you can max your luck out, which is super hard, but
Hmm.
you can do all these things with your characters that are a lot more free than most Final Fantasy games are when it comes to customization. And that's a
Yeah.
lot of the reason why I really like 10's leveling system.
And maxing your luck is um, somewhat of a mandatory thing to do if you want to fight like Penance or Dark Anima, because or Dark Yojimbo, because
Mm.
their evasion is maxed out, which means unless your accuracy and evasion are also maxed out, like you need luck maxed out, because if they have higher luck than you do, they're going to you're going to miss every single time you try and attack them.
Or just Zanmato their asses.
Or you could do that. But see, that's difficult to do when you're fighting Dark Yojimbo, because you have to fight Dark Yojimbo 5 times in a row. And if you save, it resets. If you
Yep.
lose, it resets. If you restart the game for whatever reason, it resets. Yojimbo needs to be beaten 5 times in a row, on like as while the game is still on and running. Like you can't, unless you do like an emulator and you have save states. But that's 5 Zanmatos in a row. and if you lose to Dark Yojimbo, it resets. So, and he also has the ability to use Zanmato. So, it's, but I like how the game is easily broken, and they know that. So they'll throw things into the game where it's just like, okay, well, this is going to be a little harder for you to break, so have fun with this.
Mhm.
Um, but the sphere grid and how everything in this game is is a working mechanism that plays into another one. I mean, the theme of the game, the continent is called Spira, and it's a spiral, and it's the spiral, the cycle of life and death. Everything in this game has to do with kind of like a cycle, and so each Aeon is attributed to a character as well. So,
Mhm.
like if I think if Orin maxes out his celestial weapon, Ifrit learns break damage limit,
Yep.
and if Yuna is leveling up, her Aeons are leveling up. Like it's like everything is a working mechanism that goes into another. So it feels like nothing is wasted in this game. Like yeah, okay, like Lulu, you might not use Lulu, but you max out her celestial weapon. You might never use Lulu, but it wasn't a waste of time because now I think Valifor learns break damage limit, or Shiva learns break damage limit when Lulu maxes out her Onion Knight or something like that. So
Mhm.
nothing ever really seems wasted, and I just like how the sphere grid also plays into um, like just you know leveling up your characters is more than just leveling up your characters. You're leveling up your Aeons, and you're also there's just something about that sound when you click on like a power, like a strength node, and you use a power sphere on it. That sound of it activating is kind of like a little dopamine rush. Like you're just like, that +2 strength makes you just feel so empowered. Like every time I see a +4
Mhm.
strength sphere, I'm like,
Woo.
oh my god, there's 4 of these in a row. I'm gonna be hitting so hard after this.
Oh my
Like,
god.
that.
It's funny. It's funny that you mentioned the interlocking systems too, because like even the items, down to the items,
Mhm.
interlocked with everything. Like Riku's mix
Oh god, yeah.
overdrive,
Mhm.
customizing your weapons, like all of
Mhm.
it just interlocks. And like the other thing too about weapons is that a lot of games that I really wish would implement systems like this. And 14 has it with the glamour system a little bit, but
Mhm.
so let's you find a weapon that you like and you really like it and you really like the way it looks, but
Yeah.
an hour later it's obsolete.
Yeah.
Mhm.
10 does this really cool thing with the Brotherhood sword
Mhm.
where as the game goes, the farther you get in the story, the more evolved Brotherhood gets.
Mhm.
So by the time that you get to the end of the game, Brotherhood I think is the best non-customized sword in the game for Titus other than his celestial weapon.
The
And
only thing.
it evolves with him as his character evolves, and I think that's such a great concept, and it also plays into the interlocking systems like you're talking about.
The
Yeah.
only thing I don't like about the Brotherhood sword, I love everything about it. The cosmetics of it, how it looks like it's like running water inside of a sword, like a little aquarium. I just hate how it gets water strike. Like I don't
Yeah,
like when
Yeah,
swords
that
get
kind of makes it.
elemental abilities.
Yeah.
Um, unless I need it to have an elemental ability, but then like Thunder Plains, you're using Brotherhood because it's demolishing
Water.
everything in the Thunder Plains. But then once you get to like uh what is it? The when you're underwater.
Oh
Um,
god. Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
but like when the underwater
The
part of Mount Gagazet, like you're doing like
That's
zero
it.
damage to things that absorb water.
yeah,
Um, but also like the items and the spheres and everything, like nothing in this game seems like an afterthought.
Mhm.
Everything just seems like it's so intentional. Like if your characters are leveled up a decent amount and your Aeons aren't, well, you can take those spheres and level up those Aeons. But again, this is that's only if you're um, following the story, doing all the side stuff, because you meet these NPCs that you could miss otherwise, but if you
Mhm.
are, because you could tell when somebody's like, an NPC that's just gonna have like 2 words of dialogue, or there's somebody standing there who looks like they shouldn't be standing there, and you go and
Yeah.
talk to them, and now you're fighting another summoner.
Yeah, I mean, in Final Fantasy X, like on my playthrough right now, most of all of the NPCs, it feels like give me a or give me an item or something.
Mhm.
Like I never feel like I'm they're wasted dialogue most of the time.
Mhm.
And there's not very many. It's not like, oh my God, I got to talk to every single person in this town. They're not that many, and like it's almost always worth it to talk to an NPC.
Mhm.
And then eventually, hey, you might run into somebody who's going to lead you down a path, right?
Mhm.
And also kind of to piggyback off of that, don't forget about the Jek spheres, man. Like
Mhm.
that tells such a big important part of the story. And of course, you get like you're forced to get some of those.
You're only
But
forced
you
to
get
get
the
one.
whole, is that right?
The
Yeah, the
sphere
Just
morph
one?
spheromorph.
drops one.
The spheromorph. Okay. All right. Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you don't get all of them, then you don't get Auron's overdrives.
That's true. Yep.
Mhm.
You go back and you get all the overdrives, and which is what I did just recently on this playthrough. Like after beating the sphere morph, if you go back, you can travel all the way back to Besaid, and which is like an hour and a half trek. But if
Mhm.
you do it, you don't have to fight Dark Valifor in front of the Jek sphere, and you just pick that sphere up. What I did is I went all the way back to so if you're playing this game for the maybe first or replaying it, do this like get the sphere morph one and then go all the way back to Besaid, even skip past the ones that you see on the road. Like, cause sometimes you'll see one in Thunder Plains and you have to literally walk right by it.
Mhm.
But just keep walking, go back to Besaid, and then get the whole like story arc, like their journey and how it echoes kind of the journey of Tidus and his journey with so because like Tidus and Jekt kind of share a similar arc
Mhm.
and it's kind of cool and that's a side quest like that's
Also playing into the spiral.
Yep.
also playing into the spiral.
and
Nice.
and then
Yep.
also like these little lore bits that you get pay off if you see them before you get to where you're supposed to be, like um when you go over the Moonflow and you see the shoe puff that has a scar on its leg, and you watch the Jek sphere where Jekt gets super drunk, and
Mm-hmm.
like that's his coming of age part right there. He gets super drunk and attacks the shoe puff because he thinks
And
it's a
ruin
monster.
like kind of puts Braska in like some kind of deep water stuff like that. Yeah,
Well,
and
they
he's like
they
he
they
has to
have to
apologize. Like
they
he
have to
literally
spend all of their money, all of the money that they
yeah.
have as restitutions, and then he's like,
That was a big moment for Jack. He said the only thing I'm drinking from now on is shoe puff milk.
"Yep."
Like he's like not drinking anything anymore. That was a big moment for Jack. Yeah.
um, but yeah, so you have those little lore bits, and then some of the NPCs just kind of give you information. Like I don't know if this is actually in the game. It's in the Ultimania. I'm sure somebody tells you this in the game, but there's the very first high summoner that uses the final summoning to defeat Sin. His name is Gandalf, and he's famous for being the summoner who locks away the evil cactuars in the stones in the Thunder Plains. And I never knew that before I read the Ultimania, but I was like, you know, there's just these like there's just these little stories that you could completely miss, like the Cavern of the Stolen Faith.
Mm.
If you never
Hmm.
go down there, that's a whole part of Lulu's backstory that you'll just never get. Her
Yeah.
her her first pilgrimage, which was a failed one because her summoner died in there.
We've all
And
played Chrono Trigger, right?
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so it remind a lot of what 10 does with the backstories of the side characters reminds me of how Chrono Trigger resolves all of its issues
Hmm.
with
Mhm.
the background characters, like Frog, for instance, how
Mhm.
he's like really broken up about Cyrus. You finally go through and he gets some closure. That's kind of Lulu, right?
Mhm.
Mm.
Like, or you kind of have these resolutions that go on, and it's almost as if the characters are making peace with their eventual fate.
Mhm.
They're going through and they're evolving, and like with Lulu, like you mentioned with the Cavern of the Soul and Faith,
Mhm.
she's making her peace with that, and now it's okay for her if she dies. If she dies, she can now go with knowing that she has cleared not only her conscience, but also she's made peace with her former summoner.
Hmm.
So I like that is also in a side story, and I also like that like Myken is an NPC in the game, and he goes around and he tells you every area you go to, this is the history that happened here.
Yeah.
This is the ground where this future was laid. And then, like you said with the Jex spheres, I don't think I've ever quite seen a game where you take a character that is entirely in the background until the very end, basically. You get little snippets of him here, you get little snippets of him there. And he's one of the main, I don't want to say villains, because I don't really see Jecht as a traditional villain, but he's one of the main villains that you hardly know anything about other than his perspective from people that love him, and obviously Titus, who hates him. And then you watch the Jecht spheres and you see him evolve and you see him become the man that he'll become. And it's like I don't think you hardly ever see that with a character that's entirely in the background all the time.
Yeah.
So I really
And
like that
it's
aspect
such a
of it.
major part of
Yeah.
the game too. Yeah.
Like the NPCs and side stories, like if you were to look at video games, I think Final Fantasy X for its time is the perfect RPG.
Hmm.
It does so many things right in that sense, like story and everything feeling like it's not a waste of your time.
Hmm.
yeah.
And like so these it's like Final Fantasy X um really rode the popularity of the Blair Witch, and like it had like this like found footage aspect of like Yuna and Titus are going on a journey that their parents also went on, and like they're experiencing their journey through these Jex spheres that I mean if you it adds a layer to the story that you wouldn't get otherwise if you just like breezed through it and just disregarded the Jex spheres, because there are some that are somewhat difficult to get, right? I think there's like one or two that you need to do some like serious backtracking. I think in Bicanel there's
Yeah.
one.
Like the
Yeah.
one, yeah. And then of course there was the one that is like the hardest to get, but if you do the method that I said, it's the easiest to get. It just takes
Mhm.
a long time. But there is that one that's sealed behind a dark Aeon, which is like, what the, you know what I mean? That's
Unless you're
really difficult.
playing the original American release where there were no Dark Aeons, then you had
Yeah.
nothing to worry about.
Oh, that's true. You're right. You're right. Absolutely right.
Because my
Oh, it's
first
funny
playthrough
that
of this was the American version.
yes, same. I didn't play the international version. Actually didn't play the international version at all until 10 HD. So yeah. But anyways, it's funny that you mentioned pop culture reference because I have to do it. You know, I have to do it, man. Star Wars reference. Here it comes. So like, you know how like Star Wars is, it's no secret. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It's an inspiration for Final Fantasy. You got Biggs Wedge, every single one of them almost. Um, but Final Fantasy X, I feel like draws some elements from the Phantom Menace. You know what I mean? Like, so, like, if you think about Star Wars, you're just like, oh, you always go to original trilogy. That's what Final Fantasy draws from. But look at the visual style of Final Fantasy X, right? Like the area of Luca or Bevel. Man, does that not give you Naboo like
A little
vibes?
bit,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like I like even the animation gives me that Phantom Menace vibes, which makes sense because Phantom Menace came out in 1999, about the same time that Final Fantasy X went under development. So you can kind of like put the pieces together that okay, hey, Final Fantasy guys are always big Star Wars fans, so this is Star Wars fever in full effect again because the prequels are coming out. You know,
Even the forest areas of 10 kind of look very Naboo like.
yeah, and
Like where you meet Jar Jar.
and the sport of blitzball kind of feels like pod racing, kind of throw that fun sport element in there.
Hmm.
And like Yeah, this came out in 1999, so right around the same time that it started development. And when Final Fantasy X released, it was only months before Episode 2 was on its way out. That came out in 2002. So Star Wars fever, man, it was there.
You could even say that Beacon L was kind of like Tatooine too,
Hmm.
yeah,
and
absolutely.
the Albed or Sand People.
And the shoe puff driver.
Yeah.
Dude, did that give you Jar Jar Binks vibes? Because I got some Jar Jar Binks vibes, or Gungan vibes.
They even kind of
So
talk similar.
right, like there's that goofy like rise this shoe puff. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, kind of feels like, and even the aliens. And I mean, I could be totally. I'm trying to think back, but at least in Final Fantasy X, it was more visually represented. But there was different like alien races. Like you had bird people, you had like the shoe puff driver person that's a blue, and so like the alien choices, the alien creature design felt Star Wars
Mhm.
Phantom Menace. Like it felt like prequel Star Wars to me. And
Mm.
I just kind of was like, man, isn't that kind of crazy? Like I put some Phantom Menace uh comparisons there.
Well, and obviously, like we talked about before the show, you could liken Titus Inject to Luke and Darth
Mhm.
Vader
Mhm.
Yeah,
too.
clearly that father son dynamic thing. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And
So I just wanted to bring that up. Thought that was kind of cool.
so let's get into your favorite play styles.
Okay, I thought you
So
were okay.
what?
I thought you were about to say your favorite mini game, and I was like, no, I don't know.
It's definitely not Chocobo racing, I'll tell you that.
All right, go ahead. Your favorite play style. Go ahead.
So with the sphere grid being as versatile as it is, it opens itself up to um, you can you can play this game how it was kind of like the cookie cutter intended. Everybody stays down their class. You can play to where you pick your like three favorite, and then those are the only three people that you really level up, and they just go through the sphere grid. I've done a no sphere grid run before. It takes a very long
Crazy.
time. Um, the
It
challenge
does.
was no sphere grid, no Aeons, and it was extremely difficult to get through. But
Yeah.
and then somebody was just like, "Well, you got to try no sphere grid, no spheres, no Aeons, no items." I was like, "I don't even know how I'm gonna do that. I don't even know
No
if that's possible."
overdrives.
No overdrives is another one, but like no
Hey,
items,
just put the controller down and see if the game beats itself.
basically,
see what happens.
Hit
basically.
controller against head, win.
I At that point I would just say, if I uninstall it, I beat it. So
Yeah, there you go. Right? Yeah.
so like so how did you guys enjoy, like, what's your favorite way to play this game?
So I think probably my favorite way to play it is, so I have three main characters that I use, and this is just who I use all the time. It's Waka, Aaron, and Yuna. Number one, summoners are like my favorite. Like, other than 14, where I have not, I have a summoner, but I don't use it that often. Um, Summoning has always been one of my favorite parts of the entire franchise. So I always make Yuna like my black mage, because I know that Lulu is. I love Lulu. It's one of my first video game crushes for obvious reasons. And so I tend to put Yuna down the black mage path while also building her Aeons. Especially because her Aeons are like super OP. Like, just the animations are amazing. Like, I don't even turn on short animations. Like, I just watch every time they come on screen. I watch every overdrive. And Orin, I like kind of making him like the speedy tank guy. Like, I like making him have all of his break abilities and just be this powerhouse, but also have that speed of Titus, because like, you mix those two and he's just the ultimate, well, just ultimate warrior. And then like, yeah, and that's literally what popped in my head.
Yeah.
But then I like to have Waka, because like eventually Waka is like one of the most powerful characters in the game, and he takes care of just about every single enemy you could come against. Flyers, if you have like, if your weapons are imbued with certain elements, you can take down the flan enemies that have like the magic, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And if you don't, you've got Yuna that can take care of those. Like Waka's super versatile, and you can take him down either like Titus's path where he's super fast, or you can go Orin's path and he hits like a truck. Like,
Yeah.
so I kind of like that hit fast, hit hard, and that kind of play style where it's just very barbaric, I guess is what you would call it.
Hmm.
That's cool. Like, so for me, I didn't know about like I didn't really think about it that much, right? So like I didn't really go into the sphere grid saying, "Oh, I can like customize them." Like you're saying, it sounds so amazing. But for me, whenever I play, I mean, I just kind of stick to the roles. Like Yuna's the healer, Lulu's black mage. So that kind of like it opens up a new thing for me, and also that was part of if you do expert sphere grid, right? Like
Yeah.
so,
Hmm.
and I think in the original, it was just kind of like you said, like you could get there eventually, but it was more just Kamari can choose his path, but that's it. Um, so for me, that's interesting. I can't wait to actually kind of want to play it again, to kind of do that. But for me, it's just kind of I love the fact that it kind of implements the job system in a way. Like the job system lives on in this game, and yeah, it's just that's kind of cool. So I just kind of play it the way it presents itself to me. I just love playing the game straight up like that. That's the way I play.
So a little fun fact, because I like breaking these games and I like min maxing stuff and trying to figure out how soon I can get powerful things. So
Mm,
um, the first time you can get a level 1 key sphere is after you fight Ochu in
mm,
Kilika.
mm-hmm.
So I grabbed that level 1 key sphere, gave it to Kamari to break into Riku's sphere grid so that Kamari can learn Steel
Yeah.
early on in the game, and then I went back and stole from everything from the beginning to, well, as far back as you can go into the beginning to
Mm-hmm.
till you get Riku. And I've come to find out that, and I kind of respect this choice from the developers. There is nothing that will give you an edge if Kamari learns Steel before you get Riku. And I kind of respect that they didn't throw any like, oh, you can get these powerful items from stealing from these guys. There's really none of that, because by the
Mm-hmm.
time you get Riku and you have Steel innately, there's nothing you've really missed. There's nobody you could steal level 2 key spheres from. You can steal some of the like electro marbles and stuff like that from
Yeah.
enemies, but that doesn't really become useful until you get to the Comlands, where you can start teaching your Aeons spells that they wouldn't normally know, which you'd have Riku at that point anyway. So there was really no
Yeah.
benefit for having Kamari learn Steel. Um, so my advice for Kamari all the time is, uh, I usually send him down Walker or Orin's path, just so you have two
Mm-hmm.
heavy hitters instead of just the one. Because Waka later on in his sphere grid gets a lot of like strength +4 spheres as well. He's also a pretty heavy hitter. Um, but as far as characters I play as, like Riku's always in there because of her overdrive. Mix is, I think, probably one of the most powerful overdrives in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like playing as Yuna because her Nirvana is the easiest celestial weapon to max out. Like, you really don't have to try very hard.
And you get the
Um,
first item in Besaid.
in Besaid, if you
Yep.
follow that little path, you get, what is it, the Moon Sigil
Yeah,
or the
it's
Moon
Moon Sigil, I
Crest.
think. Yeah.
The
They
sigils are the
changed something, man.
ones.
I don't know. Like I don't know if you guys I mean I noticed it in this playthrough. They changed up things from like the Saturn's crest is now the Mars crest. It was weird. It
Yeah.
was weird.
They
I don't
changed Kimari, Arin, and I think that might be the two that it was Saturn and Mars, I think, and they
Mhm.
switched them in the HD release.
do you know why or is it just like
I I don't remember. I don't remember if I know they made a statement about it or something. They like in an Ultimania maybe, but I think it
okay.
might have just been an accident or something. I don't
Mhm.
That's
remember the
interesting.
story
Maybe like a
behind it.
mistranslation or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't
Interesting.
remember exactly.
But
Okay.
so
Yeah.
the number one reason that what drew me to this game, and this wouldn't be Final Fantasy V if we didn't talk about Pokemon just once, But
Hell yeah! This episode's got it all, guys. We got
right.
Star Wars references, Pokemon reference. Let's FF and go. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Let's FF and go.
But
Go ahead, Benny.
being able to summon a monster, and now Final Fantasy X allows you to control the summon that you bring in, and that is what was like my favorite part of about Final Fantasy X was basically going out collecting all of these Aeons and then being able to use them in battle, and their designs were so cool from Valifor to the Magus sisters, like all of them. Their
Hmm.
designs were just so cool. They each brought something unique to the table. Um, like
Not to
Ixion,
mention, oh, sorry, like what's her name?
Bel,
Belgian,
Belgamine.
Belgamine.
Belgamine. Not to mention, she was a literal Pokemon trainer.
Yep.
Like she was like, "Bring," and like, hey, you want to battle? You know,
Yep.
like, let's test our Aeons.
Um, but like they each brought like so Valifor was hard to hit, and it introduced you to Valifor was a good summon for them to put first because Valifor's sonic wings manipulated the attack bar, and that was something super beneficial to learn early on in the game, that manipulating that attack bar is how you win some of those harder fights, like pushback or haste and stuff like that. Changing the attack bar, giving yourself more turns than the enemy. So
Hmm.
Valifor was good to learn with. Ifrit was good to learn that when you cast fire on himself, like
Yeah, you
that's
can
his
heal
version
yourself.
of healing. He can heal
Hmm.
himself that way. Ixion has Arrow Spark, which is the earliest you can, unless you like grind super super hard, the earliest you can get Dispel. So you have enemies that are like buffing themselves. Well, Ixion can use Arrow Spark and take Protect and Shell away. Um,
Hmm. Which
so
was useful against that Albed boss I just fought. Uh,
um,
no, not the Albed. I'm sorry, not the Albed. The
the
Guado boss. The
the
Guado.
Wendigo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That
Hmm. Um,
one.
but the Aeons were just, they were super powerful, but they weren't
Mhm.
OP. Like they could be defeated easily by, you know, regular run of the mill enemies if you just, chose incorrectly. And
Mhm.
just like, and then my, well, all right, so let's move on into favorite Aeons now, because my favorite Aeon is Anima.
Mine too.
Everything about Anima was just so cool. Um,
What I love about the summons too is the lore.
mhm,
They're like, not only are they the faith, but they're also like, if you go back, a lot of people don't know this, but if you go back to the each temple
mhm,
and you go and talk with the faith, they give you a story.
mhm,
Like if you go and you talk to, for example, Anima,
mhm,
like when you're in Xanarkand the first time and you're going through and you see Seymour and his mother, and she basically is telling him that I want the people to accept you, and this is how it's going to happen. I will become your final Aeon. And then you go, after everything has happened, and you go back and you talk to her in Baj Temple. She tells you this tragic story of how she failed him as a mother, how she's the reason he has the thirst for power that he has, and that she actually asks you to defeat sin and her son's obsession with it. Like
mhm,
she knows that her son has become this horrible person,
Mhm.
and that we have to stop her, or we have to stop him. And she actually willingly gives us her summon to do that, even if it means killing him. And it
Mhm.
also, like, if you look at Anima's design and the feminine qualities of it,
mhm,
the arms crossing and the chain, and there's actually like a really big thing in Catholic religion, the Anima Sola,
mhm.
which is a woman chained in hell repenting for her sins,
Mhm.
Mhm.
or
And,
in purgatory, I should say. And
and
so, like, you see this lore and this backstory of just in the summons alone.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is so crazy that they actually accounted for these summons having actual backstories. Like, Bahamut is the most important summon in the game, pretty
Yeah.
much,
mhm,
Mhm.
because he's orchestrating you defeating Sin finally.
Mhm.
Like he wants everyone to stop dreaming. So he's back in Titus's past, or I guess in Dreams Anarchan, basically telling Titus, like, this is what you need to do. Like, stop being a crybaby, defeat Sin. But you don't realize that until much, much later. So I just really love the lore
Mhm.
that they've established with the Aeons themselves.
And so as far as the fans, there's actually a three-way tie here from the survey that we took for Final Fantasy X. Yojimbo, Anima, and actually Shiva being the three most popular from our survey.
So
Of
Yojimbo number one.
So Yojimbo is 21.7%, Anima is 21.7%, and Shiva is 21.7%.
Oh, three way.
Wow.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that. Three
Three-way,
way tie.
three-way
Wow.
tie, which I'm surprised Bahamut wasn't up there. He's
Yeah,
he's
that's
number
mine.
two.
He's my favorite Bahamut
Hmm.
version.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely
Oh, okay. Yeah.
my favorite Bahamut in the franchise. But
Hmm.
Anima, just everything about Anima, and then that super cool overdrive where you control the top part of Anima, and then like that bottom part of Anima, which is it Oblivion, which literally just means like just utter destruction. Um,
Hmm.
and the the American release didn't do that attack justice at all. And then the international release, where each punch had its own damage attribute to it, and then just everything about it. It was just its arms are bound, and it looks like
Hmm.
it's just like sleeping, and then it just like loses its mind. Its hair is all frazzled. Like there's nothing cute about this thing, and then it's just punching relentlessly 16 times, and then there's just this massive explosion, and then it goes back to like regular Anima after the enemy gets pile driven into the ground. Um, Anima's
Yeah.
my favorite, and
I.
actually reading through the
Yeah.
Ultimania, that the image of the woman on the necklace in the Ultimania, it says that is actually Seymour's mother's image on that
Yep.
necklace. So I thought that was
Mhm.
cool. There was a lot of speculation that that was like the Virgin Mary and stuff like that, but the Ultimania says that that is Seymour's mother's image on that necklace. And I think this game actually, Final Fantasy VII is to Norse mythology, as is me personally. I believe Final Fantasy X is to Christianity. Like I think
Hmm.
they take a lot of things from
specifically
Christianity.
specifically Catholicism, because
Hmm.
like I said, Anima Sola actually the it's funny that you mentioned the overdrive, because when she breaks the chain in Catholicism, Anima Sola, the chains would only break when the repentance had been fulfilled.
Hmm.
So it's almost like by using Anima's destructive power to defeat sin, it's like she's finally repenting and
Hmm.
breaking those chains. And it's kind of it's very Final Fantasy has a lot of those things, and it's
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
really cool as to why the summons are the way they are. So
Yeah.
I'm very much in
Another
love with Anima's concept.
Hmm.
another really cool thing about Anima is if you acquire Anima and then use her during the battle of with Seymour, in the final battle, I believe it is.
Yep.
If you use it, and like Seymour will actually say something about like
He'll
he'll
say,
respond.
yeah,
You too would betray me.
hmm
So you too would betray me, and then like that. I mean, I think that's just kind of like obviously there should have been some kind of reaction, and they accounted for that, so that's cool.
hmm
It's kind of like
Yeah.
when you do, and the other thing is too that we actually didn't talk about was in battle, when you battle certain NPCs and you can talk to them, like
hmm
Oh yeah.
in Macalania, where you can talk to Seymour with
Yeah.
different characters, and they'll say different things depending on who you talk with.
hmm
When you're fighting Sin and you're able to talk as Tidus, like Sin will lower his overdrive bar. Like
Yeah,
it
hmm
will. It will. It's just that's cool because it ties right into the story.
and when you get to talk to Jecht, even though he's like in his like final Aeon version, Titus can talk to him. His strength goes up, and I believe Orin can talk to him as well. Um,
Hmm.
Kamari can talk to Seymour during like right after the annihilation of the Ronso clan,
Mm.
Kamari gets to talk to Seymour, and that's like one of the moments where Kamari actually like breaks character and is just filled with rage that Seymour
Ronso
just
rage.
yeah, because I'm pretty sure Biron and Yankee are dead, right? Like you don't see Seymour kill them, but I'm pretty sure because like after Kamari's 1v2 against them, which is where Kamari can learn like 90% of his overdrives if you haven't learned them already. Um, and fun fact, they scale to Kamari's level.
Yep.
So you can't really be overpowered for that fight. You can, but they will be just as strong, if not stronger than Kamari, because that's just how it's like meant to be. Um, but they say like anybody who tries to stop you guys, we're gonna get in their way. And so I'm pretty
Mm.
sure he kills Biron and Yankee, and
Well,
then
and to add to that too, like we were talking about earlier, how each character kind of has their own resolution.
mhm
That moment is where Biran and Yankee finally respect Kimari,
mhm
Yeah.
and Kimari finally respects them. Like it's a mutual agreement that Kamari is a Ronzo and he's a proud Ronzo, and they acknowledge him as a proud Ronzo. And in fact, if I remember right, I don't remember 100%, but don't they say something to the effect of uh, a statue will be erected in your honor
mhm.
or something like that with a
Yep.
full horn or something like
No,
that? And
to
then,
Yuna, they say
yeah, 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 yeah,
they're gonna
yeah.
give Yuna a big horn.
Yeah. Well, then for Kamari to have finally made that peace with them, to then Seymour, fast forward to Seymour, and now all of the Ronzo and Mount Gagazet are dead.
mhm
Mm.
And Seymour literally says to him, uh, something about taking pleasure in speaking to the last Ronzo alive on Gagazet or
mhm.
something like that.
Yep.
And it's like that's where you see that raw emotion from Kimari too,
mhm.
is that he just killed all of my people and now he's gonna pay.
Well,
And it's like all of these different elements come together.
it's like the voice acting again, because like the way the scene plays out is Seymour says like they threw their lives at me one after another, and he like raises his hand up, and then he just like smirks and giggles and like clenches his fist, and then like Kamari goes no, like like you
Mm.
can hear he's like no, like everybody's dead, and then like Eunice says like very sorrowfully she's like Kamari, and he's just like ready to kill Seymour at that point, but he could talk to him,
Mhm.
um, which is a horrible, horrible Seymour fight. I hated that one so
Yeah,
much.
it's horrible.
Um,
I'm that's up next for me, so I can't wait.
That's the
yep.
thing too. Like I on the other role play aspect of it, like if I know you were talking about play styles earlier, so this kind of plays into that, but when I know a certain fight is coming up and a certain character has an emotional stake in it, I
hmm
will actually bring that character in
Right.
to kind
Yeah.
of give that. It's a weird thing. Like you don't have to do
No, yeah, I
that, but
get
it's
it.
like the role play aspect of it is this
hmm
character has a dog in this fight, and I want this character to be there for that fight. It's kind of like Aaron and Titus when it comes to Jekt.
hmm
Yeah.
Like I want those two characters there because not only is it Jekt's best friend, but it's also his son. And
Mhm.
so it's like I will bring in characters that relate to that fight. Like with Seymour, it's Kamari and Titus and Yuna because they're the characters that are the most emotionally invested in that fight. So
Yeah,
And
that's man,
to
that's when you know the steward that he's doing his job. That's when
and
you know.
and to piggyback off that, so Final Fantasy VII, our parties split up, and you can, if somebody was supposed to have like some type of lore bit, like they can get left behind in Final Fantasy VII, to where they won't be in a cutscene. But in Final Fantasy X, everybody's with you at all times. The party is never, I mean, unless you're forcibly split up, the
Yeah.
party's never split up. So like if there's a fight that's like specific to Kamari or Waka or Tidus, then you could just switch them out and you can get their lore bit. Like you don't have to worry about um, like the party formation because everybody's with you at all times, and I like that about the game, because this is a game about a journey. Now, I don't know how I would feel if like all 7 of your characters were able to fight at the same time.
Yeah.
But I like the 3-person party system, but I also like how if I get into a battle and like you don't have Lulu and you need Lulu to make the battle easier, just switch out there. You know, you don't.
The
Yeah.
tag out system was really cool.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed that.
Well,
Uh,
and yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, so, like, when you asked me earlier, you asked about like what makes this game stand apart. That was also another one, the tag out system, and going back to traditional turn based. So like, even though it was called what conditional turn
Conditional.
based,
Hmm.
but going back to a turn based system to give you time because Final Fantasy X is so strategic. Like, I mean, for most of the field battles are really simple, really easy. Just make sure you swap out Titus to take out the dogs, swap out, Orin to take out the shells, whatever. Um, but when you get into the boss fights, that's when the strategy comes into play. You're like, okay, I need to bring in Riku to steal this person's high potions so they're not using auto potions. Switch out Riku, bring in somebody else. And like I just love that about the gives you time to think about it. You can swap out your party. Everybody feels included. In fact, you might want to keep swapping out your party so you can level them up
Hmm.
and make sure they at least participate at least once.
They need to perform
Um,
one action. You can't just have them
yeah,
out
just
there.
perform one action and you're good. So yeah, I mean, I just really love that part. You can go ahead now, soldier. My bad.
Well, and the thing is too, what a lot of people don't know is that your attack determines the next roll of the order
Yeah.
for your chain. So like,
Mhm.
uh, let's say you summon an Aeon, and you can do like an attack, the enemy does an attack, you do an attack, vice versa. It keeps going back and forth. But if you use an overdrive and it does not kill the enemy, it's almost like you have this recharge period
Mhm.
where you can't attack because the
Mhm.
turn order is so it's changed. And it also is that way with other characters. So like if Auron uses like a really high powered attack, it's going to be more of attacks on him and he will go down farther in the turn order. Whereas if he just used like a normal standard attack, he might attack in his turn of the rotation.
It,
But it actually changes based on what attacks you use. And I
Yeah,
really
and
love that too.
you can see it before you do it too, which is also
Exactly.
like
really
like
cool.
25 turns in advance. It's like a play
Mhm.
on casting time. You have
Yep.
no cast time, but you have a recharge time now. And
Yeah.
then moves like quick hit, where it's like a full powered regular physical attack, but then you can probably do 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 quick hits in a row before somebody else goes. Like quick hit
Yeah.
really changes the dynamic of these regular battles.
And I
And
find
that's
myself using like spells like haste and stop and things like that a lot more in Final Fantasy X than I did
In
in
previous
like
installments.
in previous installments, right? That was more of like hey, a benefit, but for Final Fantasy X it feels more like oh, I can if I use haste on Riku, I can bump her up the chain. Like you can literally see she's gonna be next now. It's like, oh, that's exactly what I
Mhm.
needed. So yeah, I like that about it.
And
well,
and
and you mentioned it earlier with the swapping in and out of characters. But if you like, so how what Final Fantasy X does really well, I think, is that each character kind of has their own specialty.
mhm.
Hmm.
And with Riku, not only is she versatile in the fact that she can steal and use the items that she's stolen, but if she fights an Albed Machina and steals from them,
Mhm.
she destroys them instantly.
Yep.
So, like, if you're in Beacon Island or
Hmm.
you're in any location where there's a lot of those Machina
Like
enemies, you
Gagazet.
could literally just run through and just steal from them, and it actually destroys them. So you can those battles actually go a lot faster when she steals, which I think is a
That's
cool dynamic because it's like
yeah,
she's the mechanic
Saboteur.
type character,
the saboteur.
and yeah, the saboteur type character, and just runs in and destroys stuff. So it's
Mhm.
it's kind of a cool little feature too, and that's another. It's like the story, all the interlocking systems that we've been talking about, literally work together.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And and
Yeah.
like to go along with like what you were saying about haste and how powerful they make haste in this one. Um, Crafting your ultimate armor was a lot of fun, where you had um,
Mhm.
everybody needed auto haste. Everybody, you wanted everybody to have auto protect. You wanted everybody to have auto potion because, you wanted that constant healing. Um, you wanted everybody to have, or some people to have like, um, auto phoenix. I think auto phoenix down was one, right? I believe.
Auto life, I think is
Well,
I think auto phoenix or auto life or something like that.
I think it's uh, I think it's auto phoenix because auto life. I don't think you could get on armor because that. I think you would just constantly you just wouldn't be able to die at all. Um, but I know Riku's Hyper Mighty Guard would put auto life on. Uh, Riku's Hyper Mighty Guard was haste, shell, protect, auto life, um, and regen, I believe, like all, you know, all in one move. But crafting that like ultimate armor was a lot of grinding, but it was also a lot of fun making these things because when you create somebody's ultimate armor, like for Titus or Waka or Riku, it's like their armor. It's like they know you're crafting their ultimate armor because the name of the armor is kind of exclusive to like something about their personality. Like Waka's ultimate armor is like uh I forget what it's called. I think it might be called Goldkeeper or something or something along those lines. Like it has to do with Blitzball for him, and Riku's has to do with like um, being a thief, and Yuna's has to do with being is like I think it's like goddess type stuff. But yeah, I just those spells. Final Fantasy X definitely makes some of the spells that were kind of lackluster in previous installments made them more beneficial in this one because they were able to ramp up the difficulty with the bosses going to that conditional turn based because you had more time to think of what you were going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely. I agree.
also, since this was cutting edge technology, how did you guys feel about seeing these classic Final Fantasy monsters updated in like these 3D graphics? Because you have the Tonberry, you have all these classic Final Fantasy monsters that were in almost every single installment, and now you get to see
Yeah.
them completely reimagined. You could clearly tell what they were, but then you also had this like these designs that you couldn't get with the pixelated graphics.
I personally loved seeing all of these like all of these enemies, spells, everything really, because
Mhm.
like even
Mm-hmm.
seeing the spell animations was insane for its time,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it's like you see obviously, like when people see fire, they want like realistic fire animations and stuff like that. And I think at the time, 10 was one of the most realistic when it pertained to like spell casting and stuff too. But the
Mhm.
monsters, like when you see a Malboro in Final Fantasy X,
They're
I feel it is
menacing.
so much scarier.
Right.
It's like such a yeah, there we go. It is so much scarier seeing something like that in Final Fantasy X, especially in the Omega Ruins,
Oh
where
yeah.
you don't get very many chances to survive in the Omega Ruins, and
The,
then that comes up, and it's like, it's one of those things where 10 had a lot of great monsters, and
Mm-hmm.
it made a lot of great monsters look intimidating.
mhm.
Yeah, and you get the sense of scale. I mean, I think Final Fantasy 9 and 8, but like you said, it was PlayStation 1 graphics.
Mhm.
But you get that sense of scale in Final Fantasy 10, it feels like. We're going up against one of the I call them the Iron Giants. I don't know what their real name is, but like the big ones in the Thunder Plane.
They're Iron
Uh
Giants. You got it right.
Yeah.
Okay, Iron Giants. There we go. So when you go up against the Iron Giants, man, like that that's intimidating. That's huge. And like you said, the one of the first bosses that you fight in the game, the Ochos or Ouchos.
Ochu.
What? Dude, that
Yeah.
was crazy, right? Like just seeing him that big. And then of course, you get the scale of fighting Sin. And you're
Mhm.
fighting him on, it kind of gives you back to harken back to like fighting one of the weapons in Final Fantasy VII on the airship. Well, this one makes you feel like it, dude. Like you're fighting Sin on the airship. That he's on your side, on your right, and then like in front of you, and then it just feels so epic. And even the one before Kilika, before going to Kilika, where you harpoon Sin, and then it's just like pulling you around. It kind of felt more cinematic than ever before, I guess. Like the battles felt more cinematic than ever before.
Mhm.
So yeah, man, it was
And
it was pretty awesome.
Well,
and
and to this day, I think Final Fantasy X is the only Final Fantasy where airships had a practical use in combat too, right?
Hmm.
um
Because I don't recall any other game where you could give commands to the airship and it would fire missiles or
the
Huh.
salvo, I think it was called,
The
right?
salvo, yeah.
yeah, I don't I
You,
don't
I
I
think you're
can't
right.
think of any single
I
one
mean,
where you've had the ability to like literally attack or
mhm.
move back and forth against an enemy
Hmm. And that would give
using
you a strategic edge in battle. Like, if you were far away from Evray, he couldn't use his poison mist on you. And if he had it, you know, um, loaded up, he would miss if you moved the airship
yeah.
back in time. But that also opened you up to Swooping Scythe, where he would come and close the distance on you if you didn't move in on your own.
Mhm.
And you
Um,
could also still use Lulu and Waka as your
that far
ranged.
away. Hmm.
Yeah, and even the summons too. Like if you had Lulu, Waka, and Yuna out,
Well,
you could use.
Yuna
Oh,
was
yeah, Yuna was
kidnapped
not
by them,
there. Yeah.
or else that would have been way easier. I wouldn't have had
Yeah.
as much trouble. But
Yeah,
so, uh,
that was cool. Like the interaction with the environments and stuff like that within the battles.
mhm,
That was kind of introduced in 10. That's cool. Yeah.
The boat at the Luca, where you
mhm.
could use the crane to defeat the
Yes,
blitz.
fighting the
Yeah,
Blitzerator.
yeah.
Well,
Yep.
um, so Daniel had brought something up. I'm gonna let you talk about this one because you're the one who brought it to my attention. But
Right.
on page 77 of the Ultimania, it
Oh yeah, yeah,
it talks about the Demonolith from the Omega Ruins. Well,
yeah.
there's a nice little lore bit in there that I'll have Daniel explain because I found this really intriguing, and this is something I want to look further into.
I
Um,
have those books and I need to read them.
Dude,
they're
it's
amazing.
just really cool. There's a lot of, and like it goes back, but before Final Fantasy X it was in like pre-production. You probably have heard about it, but it was called 17. And like it explains what the game was potentially going to be and how it evolved.
Mhm.
And I just love these books. It's the Ultimania
Yep,
archives.
I've got those.
So the Demonolith, right there. I was just kind of reading. I flipped through. We all know the Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy X connection, right? They could be a shared universe, but this one kind of had me. I was like, wait a second, time to start those theory videos now. A fossil of the Final Fantasy VIII monster. What? So it's a fossil of the Final Fantasy VIII monster. Elvere is buried behind it. Please mark the horns to stand out. Other parts can be textures. So it was like, please make sure that it's kind of obvious that this is a fossil. It could probably be easily just a callback to Final Fantasy
Oh
VIII.
yeah.
But I'm just like, dude, is there a shared universe with eight now? What's going on? I mean, we got the same team. They could be like trying to create their MCU. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But anyways, but it's probably nothing to get crazy about. But
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Um, but so, looking through the Ultimania and looking at like all the monster designs and everything, and of course all the bosses, because that's probably one of the most important parts of Final Fantasy is the bosses. Um, I One thing that stood out to me in Final Fantasy X in the monster arena was the only monster in the monster arena that wasn't a reskin was Naslug. And
Hmm.
that was the only time that creature's sprite was found in the game was when you fight him in the monster arena. And he had a unique design. He had a very unique way of battling. Um, if you didn't do enough damage, he would regen all of his health back, and you'd have
Hmm.
to try again. You had to do enough damage to him, before he gets a turn, or else he would regen all of his health back. So the easiest way was, Waka uses attack reels, make sure you got the perfect on the attack reels, and then you would do just enough damage to break his shell, and then you can defeat the Slug. But just as far as bosses go, he was very unique to me. I really like all of the Monster Arena bosses. I like
Mhm.
how Evray Atlanta made a reappearance, and that was you can only use Waka, Tidus, and Riku for that Monster Arena fight, which made it a little more difficult because you couldn't rely on, like some other things. Um, but as far as like favorite bosses go, I think my favorite boss would probably be either the Sanctuary Keeper or the Spectral Keeper. The Spectral
That is
Keeper.
that's a really cool fight.
This is special.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah.
But that would be my choice.
So like
Yeah.
two things about the Monster Arena.
Mhm.
One, never really did get much story about the monster that's trapped inside the gate of the Monster Arena.
Right?
And number
Mm.
two, the Monster Arena is actually key to maxing out your characters with the Don Tonberry trick.
hmm
99 levels in one fight.
Yep. And
Yeah.
actually,
How does that work?
we didn't talk about that. We could talk about overdrives after we talk about our favorite bosses because that's another aspect of the game that allowed you to customize. You just you know you learned overdrive modes as your character played a certain way.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
if
that's right.
Waka was constantly landing dark attack, he learned the was it called Saboteur or
It might have
Tactician
been.
tactician or
Tactician.
something like that, where
Mm.
he would gain overdrive gauge as he landed dark attacks. So I thought
Yeah,
that was really cool.
that
But
is cool. Like, and if you land the final blow, you win like the victor overdrive
mhm.
build up too. Yeah, that's cool.
So favorite bosses.
Hmm.
For me, it's going to be Everay just because actually, I don't know if it's my favorite or more of just like it just stands out to me at all times just because my first playthrough when I got it for my birthday that year, I got stuck at
Mhm.
Everay and I couldn't beat Everay. I was just it was so frustrating. I think I had to grind a bunch and I didn't know all the ins and outs of games like at that time. I was just trying to play it. So I was just grinding, trying to get this thing finally beat Everay, and the reward of seeing that awesome cutscene of like raiding the wedding crashing that was I
With
was
the
like that.
Fireflies.
Yeah, that's gonna be stuck in my mind. And then also seeing Everay pop up again underwater, I was like, you mother no. Like just you got it. Not no. I was like Will Smith, like no. If you're real, you better tell me right now. And like and it was, but obviously that was super easy as you just use like healing stuff on him.
Yeah,
But like
Phoenix Down will
dude,
just
I just remember seeing him show up again. I was like, no,
I was
no.
scared too. I was scared
Just,
too.
I was like, please no.
And
But yeah, and then I got stuck on Sin Overdrive. So that was that. Those are the two bosses that are always going to stick out to me.
and the thing about Evray is like I don't know if the monsters on the airship was before game testing or after game testing, because if they didn't have those monsters on the airship before Evray and you weren't strong enough to beat Evray, like there's your game over right there. There's your start over, and it
Mhm.
it just seemed like such an afterthought. Okay, maybe all right. The one afterthought this game has was um the fiends getting onto the airship because it seemed like that was thrown in there because they were like, we made Evray pretty hard and we gave you no way to grind
hmm
to beat him, and they were just like, all right, instead of making him easier, which I'm glad they didn't, they threw in monsters.
Yeah,
Now I
that's
don't
how I had
know
to
if
grind.
I don't know if that was intentional, like if they knew Evray was going to be hard, so they had it on there, or if they realized how hard they made Evray and
So give them
added
an
that
easier way to
after.
level up, so they don't have to travel somewhere to level. They can just
hmm
level grind right there on the ship.
Well, when you're on the ship, you can't go anywhere else. You have to go to Bavel. You're on course for
Oh yeah, I
Bavel.
guy guess you're right.
yeah.
So they were
So,
probably they definitely maybe it wasn't an afterthought. Maybe it was well. either not an afterthought or they were like, wait, we need to give them something to level up
Hmm.
with if they're not ready. like,
Yep.
just throw them on the ship. Why not?
Well, and if I remember right, that scene is right after the destruction of home, so it actually
Hmm.
makes sense for the fiends to be on there because they were attacking home. And
Yeah,
if
Yeah,
they
yeah.
if they made it onto the airship, then yeah, I mean
but they
they do back it up with a story reason though.
but they
Hmm.
don't.
So
It's
True.
just weird. Like you have like maybe about 15 minutes of conversation. Like they're in the air. They're flying to Bavel. There's like
God, I'm
15
getting
minutes of conver.
flashbacks now. I was
Yeah.
stuck on
same.
the ship so long. Like now it's just like it's ingrained in my memory. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
can see this moment. I'm just like, God, I had to level so much on this thing. like grind so much on this ship. But yeah.
So Soldier, favorite boss or bosses?
Uh I would say my favorite boss would probably have to be um well there's two. So number one would have to be Seymour the first time when you
Hmm.
fight him in Makalania and you get Shiva for the first time and then you see Anima.
Hmm.
And the only time you've ever really seen Anima is the Blitzball match where you see Seymour using it to destroy all the fiends in the arena. But then you have to fight Anima. And
Hmm.
it's like this big powerhouse monster, and it's just so intimidating. And you're like, okay, what am I going to do against this thing? And that's probably one of my favorite fights. And then my favorite boss fight is Jekt.
Hmm.
Oh,
That version of Otherworld is just chef's kiss. It's just
Yeah.
yeah.
you cannot. One thing I really like about Final Fantasy's themes is that they pick the perfect moments and the perfect themes to use with them, and
Mhm.
that's one of them. It's like
Yeah.
when
Hmm.
Auron shows up for the first time and Otherworld's playing, and all the destruction of Dreams Anarchan is going on. Like that was when I knew this game was going to be legit. Is when that moment hit, and for them to call back to that and show a destroyed Dreams Anarchan inside of Sin,
Hmm.
and you have to fight Jekt on this platform that's part of Dreams Anarchan, and then the song plays. So
Hmm.
that is my favorite fight in the whole game is Braska's final Aeon.
Mhm.
Hmm. I like I like how I love that fight. I was super underleveled my first ever playthrough for it, and I couldn't. I thought that was the final boss. I couldn't beat it. I was like super defeated, and I didn't know that there was another fight after it. So I kind of just like left it at that. And then I finally went back and beat it like maybe a week later. I got so scared of fighting Yu Yevon on Jack's giant sword because I never noticed that all of my characters had auto life on them for the like remainder of that fight. So I was just like, oh man, I'm gonna get my ass kicked by all these Aeons. But I like how the final Aeon looks like Jekt as a monster. Like
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
I
The
wanted to know
manifestation.
what like other people would look like as final Aeons and such. So I
Well,
thought that was really cool.
and he has his consciousness still.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like he's still able to talk to you as an Aeon, whereas like all the other Aeons kind of have to have their faith
Mhm.
talk for them.
Yeah.
So it is kind of cool to see that like where he still does have control.
Yeah,
So.
it's and there's like a whole study you could do on just the lyrics of Otherworld. Like you say, it plays at the right time. Reading the lyrics of it, like it I mean, it's very direct in a way, direct, but also leaves you to the imagination. Like, go into the sand and dust and sky. Go now. There's no better plan to do or die. Free me. Pray to the faith in the face of the light. Feed me. Fill me with sin. Get ready to fight. And then there's like there's so many things where it's just like hold now, aim is steady. Another world awaits you. 1,000 years. You ready? The other world it takes you. Right? Come on, man. This song is good, dude.
Made
Um,
specifically for them.
yeah, it's written by Umatsu. I actually didn't know that.
Yep.
Um, so I guess we'll move on to favorite video game.
We got Peter in here talking Al Bed.
Oh, really? I used to try and do that all the time. I tried to learn the language, and I got like some things. It escapes me now, but I thought that was so cool that they made their own language in this game, and
Yeah, it's like a fully fleshed out language.
it's a
Yeah,
fully
it's
fleshed
pretty
out
great.
language, and Spira, like those weird wacky symbols, those are all attributed to like letters as well, and then the glyphs also are attributed to letters. Like there's stuff on the internet that can explain the Spearin alphabet to you so that you can write in Spearin and stuff. Like they made their own
Mhm.
language. I
It's
mean
really cool.
it's not like super difficult because they just took a
No, they
letter
just replace
and
No.
letters with
yeah,
letters.
but it's still cool that they did it, and then made it part of the game where, a lot of the secret locations that you could find on the airship, if you know how to read Albed, then you can find those locations and then find like Riku's God Hand. Well, um, yeah, find Riku's God Hand because it tells you to literally type out God Hand and then you can find
Hmm.
Riku's ultimate weapon. Which I guess that's like somewhat of a mini game. So I guess we can save the best for last. Let's talk about favorite mini game. For me,
It none of them.
oh really? Um,
Okay,
I
that's not true, but
I wouldn't consider this a mini game. It's more of a major game. But the monster hunting that that was my favorite part because it leads to my other favorite part, which is the monster arena. And so like that whole aspect was just my favorite part. Blitzball is a close second, but I also know that some people could not stand Blitzball. But I thought Blitzball could
Yeah.
be its own standalone game. So what do you guys think?
would have to say probably Blitzball.
Blitzball?
Yeah, so Blitzball is not very good for me. I don't like it. So it never clicked with me. I did put a lot of hours into it when I was a kid, and I didn't know had no idea what it was leading to. But like I just played Blitzball for fun, or I think it was fun. So I would play Blitzball. But imagine this. Let's take a just open up your mind for a second. Imagine if they made Blitzball into a full-fledged free-to-play game, and I'm talking not take out the whole like stop and go like strategy type thing. Take out all that, make it like a Rocket League esque, and you have underwater soccer, right? And
Slash
it's
UFC.
that's your gimmick, yeah, and slash freaking NHL hits, right?
Yep.
Or you know what I mean, like just straight up like hard hitting, make them fumble, and just super fast paced Rocket League style free to play like game. I think that would be so cool, especially seeing how like Rocket League has seen so much success from taking this, putting a gimmick spin on soccer or football, and then you can have underwater, right? You just basically that's your gimmick, make it like a midway sports title, and it would be super fun. Like,
Mhm.
So it's funny that you mentioned that because the big rumor is right now that in Endwalker, they are going to add Blitzball to Final Fantasy XIV's Gold Saucer.
ooh, do you think
Now,
it's going to be?
I
Yeah.
don't know. It's not confirmed yet, but
Mhm.
when they were on stage at FanFest, they were talking about Gold Saucer editions, and he promised that there would be a new mini game at the Gold Saucer in 14. And he's reading the chat, and him and Koji Fox are on stage, and literally the whole chat was just like Blitzball, Blitzball, Blitzball. Like just all the chat was just flowing, and it was just Blitzball. And he like points at the screen and he looks at Koji and he goes, "Huh, Blitzball, huh? They
Yeah, right. He's
they
got that
they
subtle.
they really want Blitzball." And so Koji was like translating for him and he's like, "Yeah, the fans really want Blitzball." So I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but there's been like this big rumor for a long time that they're going to add it, and it's possible that Endwalker finally does it. So keep your eye
Now,
out because there might be
now,
some
do you
Blitzball coming.
want? I mean, obviously, if it's in Final Fantasy 14, it's got to be multiplayer, right? Like, it's going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you can do a versus multiplayer, which would be new for Final Fan or for Blitzball. Would you want it to be like the same essence of the Final Fantasy X, or would you want it like I said, like that you know what I mean? Like let's make it fast paced, let's make it fun to play.
See, I'm actually interested to how it would go, because I would assume that
Especially, yeah.
it would be like probably cooldown, kind of like the combat.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That
not
makes sense.
necessarily turn based, but might be like certain actions take longer to redo. Like you couldn't do
The Jack shot.
you
Yeah.
couldn't do like the Jack shot 100 times, but that might be like one of your really long cooldown abilities. Whereas like a regular shot or like a poison shot might not be as much. Like I think it'd be cool if they did it that way. It would still be kind of like a boss fight in 14, where it's you're moving around a lot. There's a lot of action, but your actual moves aren't super fast paced. Like you can still kind of keep your bearings and stuff and not. So I
Kind of
don't
have the
know.
same controls as being on a mount, like a flyable mount, where you'll be able to go up and down, like
Yeah.
same kind of control, like moving through that 3D space like that. But given the option to use cooldown commands,
Yeah.
that it could be really cool. It could work out. And plus, being versus, they might have a hit on their hands. You know what I mean? But I just thought that would be really cool to go full fledged like Rocket League style blitzball,
like Madden.
Yep.
Let's go. Yeah, right. That would
Final
be so-
Fantasy EA.
Yeah. Which is okay. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, man. Vinny, put us back on track. My bad.
Oh, I mean that's all I really had. Just your guys' favorite mini games from the
Cool.
game. Even though most of the mini games seem like they were meant to cause stress and frustration.
I'd say if anything, the favorite mini game might be the Monster Arena, just because it's fun to like Pokemon Stadium, like like that. It was a Monster Arena, like catch the monsters and collect them and stuff. That was also capitalizing on the insane Pokemon fever at the time, especially with Bella Jime. I'm still
Belgamine.
Belgamine, yeah. Especially with Belgamine, it just literally felt like they were like, let's take a little Pokemon and put it in here too.
Yeah,
So is that the last topic, Vinny? Or?
Yep, that's all I had on the docket for our Final Fantasy
Dude.
X. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, closing thoughts. I'm gonna let our guest of honor give his closing thoughts.
Overall, after having this conversation, I actually kind of realized something, that as much as I knew already that Final Fantasy X was like a really well-designed game, until we really started talking about it, I didn't realize how well designed it actually was. From interlocking systems to the story having all of these different tie-togethers that, if you did some investigating, you did some discovery, you could find. And it's just, to me, Final Fantasy X is probably the perfect RPG of the PlayStation 2 era, and it really ushered in a lot of things that the future of the franchise likely capitalized on. And I think everyone needs to either go and play this game or go back and play it again and try to see it in a different light, like we have as adults, because it obviously, our perspective on the game has changed a lot over the years, and replaying it now that you have a better grasp of everything and have had some experiences in your life, you really need to go back and play it and experience it again through those eyes. And that's about it. That's what I got.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed. For me, I would say that Final Fantasy X, going back and playing it recently, before this show, because I wanted to kind of get myself better reacclimated with it all. It's still one of my favorite Final Fantasies. It's still maybe top five. And yeah, it's just, if there are flaws from that I'm noticing in this playthrough. There are flaws in the sense of like it is very, very linear now, like especially in nowadays standards. So if you do play it, you may find yourself it is a corridor. It is a one long corridor. But it still feels, like I said at the top of the show, it still gives you that sense of adventure, the sense of exploration somehow.
The pacing,
Go ahead, Vinny. I know.
the pacing really makes up for the linearity.
Exactly.
It's
The story itself and probably in all of Final Fantasy, like every Final Fantasy, maybe aside from like Final Fantasy 1 or something like that, but like this might be the most comprehensible, uh, straight story, and then if you dig in, you can find the the depth,
It's
even more depth
it's
within it. But
super
when you
user
start
friendly.
it,
Yeah,
exactly,
I always if I somebody I've been asked 100 times, what Final Fantasy should I get into? What should be the first Final Fantasy I play?
yeah, that's a topic, yeah.
And I always have a hard time not recommending 10 because 10 is so user friendly. It's a great story.
Hmm.
It's I feel like it captures the magic of the entire franchise while still doing something that sets itself apart. And
Hmm.
it's still very
Yeah.
user friendly. So I always recommend it if you're going to start with Final Fantasy. That's the one I suggest starting with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. I'm on this kind of on the same page, where I usually ask them if they say, what's the first Final Fantasy I should start with? I usually ask them what kind of gamer they are. Like, so if you're an RPG kind of gamer, and you're used to this kind of combat style, definitely 10. Start at
Mhm.
10. You know, or if you just love old school Final Fantasy, start at 1. You know, I mean, why not?
Mhm.
But like, it depends on the gamer for me, but it's always 10 or 15.
Yeah.
Maybe now that remake is involved, it might be remake as well, because that kind of gets the modern gamers in like pretty good.
Mhm.
um but yeah, so like 10 is up there as one of the first Final Fantasies that you should try for sure. I agree
It,
with Soldier.
it's great because it's so hard to recommend anything 9 and below because usually um, when somebody asks me what Final Fantasy they should break in with, like I want to say like 6 or
Right.
5, like because those are amazing stories too, but a lot of people can't get
Mhm.
past the graphics.
It's hard for people to like, if you get into a fight and you see that, oh, I have to wait my turn.
Mhm.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, so like that's why I'm like, well, maybe 10's not for you if you're a modern type kind of
Mhm.
gamer, because this is 20 years old, boys. So if you're a modern gamer, it might be like a Final Fantasy 15 might be for you. You know what I mean? Like, go in there and have some fun with this, with the combat that you're going to easily get used to, adapt to, and then maybe remake that would like kind of start to get you into that turn based waiting your turn, and then go to.
Mhm.
But yeah, like I said, man, it's so cool to like hear people rank their Final Fantasies, because they all rank in different places, depending on what they are relating to. But almost always, I feel like 10 is up there for
Mhm.
a lot of people. A lot of the traditional Final Fantasy fans might be the Final Fantasy that broke them. They might be like, I don't like the franchise anymore.
Mhm.
But this also is like a very pivotal moment, very pivotal.
And
And
have you ever noticed like when you see people bashing the franchise, the one thing they say is anything after 10?
Mhm.
You notice that?
Yeah.
yeah,
That
that's it. Yeah. So if you're a traditional Final Fantasy, it's anything after 10, like it's not good anymore.
yeah, it's like I always see that and it's never 12 or anything. And I love 12 personally. Like it's in my top
Mhm.
5. But I always see that well, the franchise hasn't been good since 10. It's you know what I mean? It's like I never see 9, I never see 7. It's always the franchise has always gone downhill after 10. So
Hmm.
Or
I
the
don't know if
other.
that speaks to the quality of like from 2001 to 2020 or
Hmm.
if it's just the fact that 10 is that good to people, or I
Mhm.
don't know
Hmm.
what the phenomenon is, but it just seems like that's always the case. It's always anything after 10. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's that pivotal moment with that cutting edge technology that we were talking about. You
the
know what I
the
mean?
the only other Final Fantasy bashing I ever see, because I usually I'm the first one to say like Final Fantasy X is my favorite, and usually people will either say like, um, and it's funny because people will say, oh 10 is really good, but seven's my favorite, or yeah I like 10, seven's overrated. Like it's usually one or the
It's
other.
always something, right? Yeah, and like for me, it's fun. It's fun to like watch people rank them. Like
Hmm.
sometimes I'll see it hurts my heart. You know, I'll see them in 10 and 7 at the bottom, and I'm just like,
If if I
but you know what? It's okay.
i-
It's what it's.
if I ever see 3 higher than a different Final Fantasy, it hurts me.
Here we go, dude. We got that Pixel remaster that we need to play for
Oh
sure.
yeah, God.
Um, But yeah, man, this has been a lot of fun. This has
Mhm.
been, I've really loved the deep dive in, and thank you so much, Soldier, for joining us for
Hey,
this
thanks
one.
for having me.
Yeah, man, thank
Always
you
a
so
pleasure.
much. Yeah,
Um,
we'll have to hook up again for another podcast because it's always a pleasure talking to you, man. And yeah, so this is it. We're gonna go ahead and sign off. What do you think? Everybody
all
good?
right.
Yep.
Yep. So this was our story. Thank you for watching.
That's beautiful, man. What a beautiful way